Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. Escape from the past. Have you ever felt that no matter how far you run, your past is always one step behind you? I have spent the last 3 years trying to escape mine, but it seems the harder I try, the closer it gets. My name is Daniel Cooper, at least that's what I go by these days. I've changed names so many times I sometimes forget who I really am. The calendar on my wall shows October 25th, and the autumn wind whistles through the crack in my apartment window, a sound that used to comfort me but now only serves as a reminder that I can never truly feel at home anywhere. I live in a small town in Montana now, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, except me. I keep to myself, working from home as a freelance programmer, minimizing human contact. My apartment is on the 3rd floor of an old building, with a clear view of Main Street below. I chose it specifically because it has 2 exits, the main entrance and a fire escape that leads to the back alley. Old habits die hard. The incident that started it all happened in Boston, but I try not to think about that anymore. Sometimes, late at night, when the shadows grow long and the silence becomes deafening, I catch myself remembering flashes of that night, the screams, the blood, the things I saw that shouldn't have been possible. But those memories belong to another life, another person. Today started like any other day, until I checked my email. There, sitting in my inbox, was a message with no subject line and an address I didn't recognize. The timestamp showed 3:33 a.m., that cursed time when the veil between worlds is thinnest, or so my grandmother used to say. The message contained only 5 words. I found you, Daniel James Harrison. My blood ran cold. That name. I hadn't heard it in 3 years. It was my real name, the one I buried along with everything else from that night. My hands trembled as I deleted the email, but I knew it was futile. In this digital age, nothing truly disappears. I spent the rest of the morning pacing my apartment, checking and rechecking the locks. The familiar panic started creeping in, the tightness in my chest, the slight tremor in my hands, the cold sweat on my forehead. I kept telling myself it was just a random email, a coincidence, but deep down, I knew better. They had found me. As evening approached, I noticed something odd about my reflection in the bathroom mirror. For a split second, I could have sworn I saw someone standing behind me, a dark figure, barely more than a shadow. But when I spun around, the bathroom was empty. Just my imagination playing tricks on me, I told myself. Yet when I looked back at the mirror, I noticed something that made my heart stop. A small symbol etched into the corner of the glass, the same symbol I'd seen carved into the walls of that abandoned hospital in Boston. The sun is setting now, casting long shadows across my apartment floor. I packed a small bag, cash, clothes, new ID. Same routine as always. But something feels different this time. The air feels heavier, charged with an electric tension that makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up. And as I write this in my journal, I can hear footsteps coming up the stairs, slow and deliberate, stopping at every floor. They're coming for me. But this time, I don't think running will save me. I made it out of the apartment just in time. As I descended the fire escape, I heard my door burst open above me. The metallic clang of my footsteps on the rusty stairs seemed deafening in the quiet evening air. When I reached the ground and looked up, I saw no one at my window, but the curtains moved as if disturbed by something more than just wind. The small town streets were nearly empty as I hurried toward the bus station. Only the occasional car passed by, their headlights casting my shadow in different directions, except once, when a car's lights swept across me, and I noticed I had no shadow at all. By the time I looked again, it was back, but that moment of absence chilled me more than the October air. While waiting for the last bus out of town, my phone buzzed. Another email. Running won't help. Daniel. You know what you saw that night. You know what you did. Attached was a photo that made my stomach turn. The abandoned Blackwood Memorial Hospital in Boston, taken the night everything went wrong. But something was different in this photo. In one of the third-floor windows, a figure stood watching. It was me, but not as I am now. It was me from that night, staring directly at the camera, even though I know there was no one there to take this picture. The bus was late, and as I sat alone at the station, memories I tried so hard to suppress came flooding back. I was a resident physician at Blackwood 3 years ago, working the night shift in the psychiatric ward. We had a patient, Sarah Chen, who kept talking about shadows that moved on their own and creatures that lived in mirrors. We all thought she was delusional until that night. I found her room empty during rounds, the walls covered in strange symbols drawn in what looked like blood. Following protocol, I called security, but no one answered. That's when I heard the screaming from the old wing, a section of the hospital that had been closed for renovation. I should have waited for backup, but I was young and stupid. I went to investigate. The bus finally arrived, its brakes squealing in the night. As I boarded, an elderly woman sitting near the front caught my eye. She smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. I hurried to the back of the bus, but when I looked again, her seat was empty. Had she even been there at all? My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't an email but a text from an unknown number. Did you really think they'd let you live after what you discovered? After what you saw in room 333? The message included another photo, the symbols from Sarah's room. But now, looking at them with 3 years more knowledge, I could finally read them. It was a warning, not the ravings of a mad woman. Sarah had been trying to protect us all. The bus drove through the night, and I struggled to stay awake. Each time I dozed off, I saw flashes of that night, the long, dark corridor of the old wing, the sound of wet footsteps following me, the impossible thing I saw in the mirror at the end of the hall. But worst of all, I remembered what happened to Sarah, what really happened to her, and why I've been running ever since. A sudden jolt woke me. The bus had stopped in the middle of nowhere. Through the window, I could see we were at some kind of checkpoint, but something was wrong. The officers checking vehicles weren't casting shadows under the bright floodlights. And as one of them approached our bus, I noticed their movements were too fluid, too smooth to be human. I realized then that running might have been the biggest mistake of all. Because whatever I saw that night at Blackwood hadn't just followed me, it had been hurting me exactly where it wanted me to go. I jumped off the bus before the officer could reach us, running into the dark woods beside the highway. Behind me, I heard no pursuit, no shouting, just an unnatural silence that seemed to swallow even the sound of my own panicked breathing. The trees loomed overhead, their branches reaching like gnarled fingers against the starless sky. My phone's flashlight provided the only illumination, casting strange shadows that seemed to move independently of the trees that should have cast them. I ran until my lungs burned, finally stopping to catch my breath against a large oak tree. That's when I noticed my phone's screen reflecting something behind me, a figure standing motionless about 20 feet away. I spun around, but there was nothing there. When I looked back at my phone screen, the figure was closer. I shut off the flashlight, plunging myself into darkness. It was then that I remembered something Sarah had told me during one of our sessions. They can only reach you through reflections, Dr. Harrison. But once they mark you, every reflective surface becomes their door. I thought of the symbol I'd seen etched in my bathroom mirror, and my blood ran cold. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed something peculiar, tiny points of light floating between the trees, like fireflies, but it was too cold for them. They moved with purpose, forming patterns similar to the symbols from Sarah's room. I remembered more that night at Blackwood, the pieces finally falling into place. Sarah hadn't been crazy. She was a researcher studying ancient symbols and their connection to parallel dimensions. Her last project had involved the renovation wing of Blackwood Hospital, specifically room 333, which had been a morgue in the 1920s. She believed the room was a nexus point, a place where the barrier between dimensions was thinnest. The night everything went wrong, I'd found her notes scattered across her room. They detailed entities that existed in a dimension parallel to ours, visible only in reflections. These beings had been trapped there eons ago, and they were looking for a way back. Sarah had discovered that certain symbols could weaken the barrier between dimensions, but others could strengthen it. She'd been working on a way to seal the breach in room 333 permanently. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness, pulling me from my thoughts. The floating lights had formed a circle around me, and in their dim glow, I could see my surroundings reflected in every dewdrop on every leaf, hundreds of tiny mirrors, all showing the same dark figure standing right behind me. My phone buzzed, making me jump. Another email. You were so close to understanding that night, Daniel. You saw us. You know what we are. But you ran before you could learn the most important truth about yourself, about why you can see us when others can't. The message contained a video attachment. Despite every instinct screaming not to, I pressed play. It was security footage from Blackwood from that night. I watched myself walking down the corridor of the old wing, approaching room 333. But in the footage, I cast no shadow. I never had. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The entities hadn't been chasing me these past 3 years. They'd been trying to bring me home. Movement caught my eye, my own reflection in a puddle at my feet. But while I stood frozen in horror, my reflection smiled and reached up toward me. Behind it, I could see room 333, just as it had been that night, waiting for my return. The floating lights grew brighter, and the air itself seemed to ripple like the surface of a disturbed pond. As reality began to tear apart around me, I finally understood why running had been pointless. You can't escape what you truly are, and you can't hide from your own reflection forever. The world around me began to fracture like broken glass, each shard reflecting a different version of reality. In one, I saw myself still standing in the hospital corridor 3 years ago. In another, I was looking at my apartment from this morning, and in yet another, I was somewhere else entirely, a place of shifting shadows and impossible geometry. My reflection reached up from every surface now, dozens of copies of myself, all wearing that same knowing smile. Their hands broke through the reflective barriers like they were made of water, grabbing at my ankles, my arms, my clothes. I tried to fight, but how do you fight your own reflection? Stop struggling, Daniel, a familiar voice said behind me. I turned to find Sarachin standing there, looking exactly as she had 3 years ago. But something was wrong. She cast multiple shadows, each pointing in a different direction, and her eyes reflected light like mirrors. You're not Sarah, I said, my voice shaking. She smiled, and her teeth gleamed like polished silver. No, but neither are you really Daniel Harrison, are you? You've worn so many names, so many faces over the centuries. It's time to remember who you truly are. The floating lights swirled around us faster now, and with each pass, another memory surfaced, not just from the past 3 years, but from decades, centuries before. I remembered other hospitals, other cities, other names. In each memory, I was investigating something supernatural, something involving mirrors and reflections. But I wasn't the investigator, I was the thing being investigated. The symbol in room 333, I gasped as understanding dawned. It wasn't a door to let you in. It was a door to keep me out. Sarah, or whatever wore her face, nodded. Humans have always feared their reflections, instinctively knowing that something else might look back. We are the mirror's children, Daniel. We exist in all reflective surfaces, watching, waiting. But you were different. You wanted to understand them, to live among them. So you forgot what you were, built yourself a human life, human memories. Images flashed through my mind, me watching countless humans through mirrors over centuries, learning their ways, their emotions, their fears. Then choosing to step through, to become one of them, to feel what they felt. But the transition had fractured my true self, scattering my memories across countless reflections. The hospital, I whispered. Sarah's research. She found out what I was. She was getting too close to the truth, Aunt Sarah said. You were assigned to watch her, but you became fascinated by her work. When she discovered your true nature, part of you wanted to help her complete the binding ritual that would seal our kind away forever. Another part wanted to stop her. The conflict literally tore you apart. The memory of that night finally played out in full, Sarah completing the ritual in room 333, me trying both to help and stop her simultaneously, my essence shattering like a broken mirror. The human part of me had run, carrying fragments of memories, while my true self remained trapped between reflections. The emails, the photos, the chase, it was all to make me remember. We had to wake you up gradually. A sudden realization would have shattered your mind completely. But now it's time to make a choice, Daniel. Remain in your fractured state, forever running from what you are, or embrace your true nature and come home. The reflective surfaces around me rippled like quicksilver, showing me glimpses of my real home, a dimension of endless mirrors and liquid light. My human memories screamed at me to run, but deeper instincts pulled me toward the familiar geometries of that other place. As reality continued to break down around me, I felt my human form beginning to dissolve, revealing something else underneath, something that existed in reflections and shadows, something that had only been pretending to be human for so long that it had forgotten it was pretending. The choice before me was impossible: remain human, with all the pain and fear and beautiful uncertainty that entails, or return to my true form, becoming something eternal but inhuman. As the world of reflections pulled at me from all sides, I made my decision. I chose humanity. The moment I made my decision, every reflection shattered simultaneously, sending shards of reality flying through the air like broken glass. Not Sarah's face contorted in a mixture of rage and disappointment, her form elongating into something that no longer attempted to look human. Fool, she hissed, her voice echoing from every reflective surface. You choose their brief, painful existence over eternal power? I choose to feel, I said, and for the first time in what might have been centuries, I truly meant it. I choose uncertainty over eternal emptiness. I choose life over mere existence. The floating lights turned blood red, and the air itself seemed to scream. The other reflections, the parts of myself I had scattered across time and space, began to move with purpose, no longer trying to pull me in but attempting to tear me apart. I felt it then, the full weight of what I truly was, an ancient being of mirrors and shadows who had grown tired of merely watching humanity and chosen to become one of them. The transition had split me into countless fragments, each living different lives, creating different memories. Now those fragments were at war, some trying to reclaim their original nature, others fighting to remain human. Sarah's final ritual in room 333 hadn't been meant to seal away the mirror's children, it had been meant to bind me permanently to my human form, to make my choice irreversible. She had understood what I was becoming and had tried to help the part of me that wanted to change. As my fragments fought each other, the forest around us began to collapse into the space between reflections. Trees twisted into impossible shapes, their surfaces becoming mirror smooth. The ground beneath my feet turned liquid, reflecting a sky that no longer existed. Not Sarah reached for me one last time, her form now a writhing mass of liquid mercury and broken glass. If you deny us, you deny yourself. You will die a human death. Better to die as something real, I said, than live forever as a reflection. I pulled Sarah's notes from my pocket, the ones I kept all these years without understanding why. The symbols on them were clear to me now. Not a binding ritual, but a transformation spell. Not an ending, but a beginning. As my other selves tried to drag me back into their world of mirrors, I began to read. Each word felt like fire in my mouth, burning away the ancient power that had defined my existence. I felt myself becoming solid, becoming real, becoming permanently human. The pain was excruciating. 3 years of running had been nothing compared to this, the agony of truly choosing mortality. My reflections screamed, shattering one by one, taking with them centuries of memories, leaving behind only the life I had built as Daniel Harrison. When it was over, I found myself lying on the forest floor, surrounded by broken glass that quickly turned to dew. The sun was rising, and for the first time in my existence, I cast a true shadow, singular, solid, and undeniably human. My phone lay shattered nearby, its screen displaying one final message: "Welcome to humanity, Daniel. Dies comes at last to all things, even reflections. Make your brief time count." I stood up, unsteady on legs that felt somehow new. My reflection in a nearby puddle showed only my face, tired, human, and mortal. No other selves lurked behind my eyes, no ancient power swirled beneath my skin. I was, at last, simply myself. As I walked out of the forest toward the rising sun, I felt something I had never truly felt before, fear of death, and with it, the exhilarating joy of being truly alive. My past was no longer chasing me. It had become me, transformed into something both less and more than what I had been. I took out my wallet and removed every ID except one, Daniel Harrison. No more running, no more hiding. I had finally chosen who I was. Behind me, in the last shadows of night, I thought I heard the sound of breaking glass, like countless mirrors shattering at once. But I didn't look back. I couldn't. After all, some reflections are best left in the past. The missing children. Have you ever wondered how quickly everything can change? How in just a blink of an eye, the world you know so well can shift into something unrecognizable? That's exactly what happened to us in this quiet little town. Our town, nestled between rolling hills and dense forests, seemed like the safest place in the world. Nothing ever happened here, nothing more than gossip at the grocery store or the rare speeding ticket. People lived their lives comfortably, their daily routines a peaceful hum. Everyone knew each other. It was the kind of place where doors were left unlocked and children played outside until sunset. I was one of those children once, running through the streets, playing hide and seek with friends after school. Now, as an adult, I felt the same sense of calm. My own daughter, Emma, often played in the very same spots I did as a child. I never worried about her safety, not until everything started to unravel. It all began on an ordinary Tuesday morning. The sun was shining, and the birds chirped as they always did. I was sipping my coffee, scrolling through my phone, when a strange notification appeared. It was a message, but it wasn't from anyone I knew. Just a series of numbers, 18, 37, 04. I brushed it off as some kind of glitch and continued with my day. But by the end of that week, something would happen that would change everything. The first child would go missing. That Tuesday felt no different from any other day, but looking back, I should have noticed something was off. The air seemed heavier, like there was an unease hovering just beneath the surface of our quiet life. But in the moment, it was all too easy to dismiss as nothing more than the routine of a small town. I walked Emma to school that morning, just like I always did. Her hand was warm in mine, and she chattered endlessly about the upcoming class trip to the local nature reserve. She was excited, her brown eyes wide with anticipation, her backpack bouncing with every step. We passed by familiar faces. Mrs. Jacobs, the elderly woman who had lived next door to us for years, was tending to her garden as usual. Mr. Clark, the mailman, waited as he loaded letters into the old metal postbox by the school. Everything felt right. The day was just beginning, and yet it felt like the end of something, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. By noon, the first message had spread across the town, whispers carried through phone calls and quick exchanges at the grocery store. A boy named Liam, a 7-year-old in Emma's class, hadn't come home after lunch break. His mother had called the school, her voice frantic, but no one knew where he had gone. At first, no one panicked. It wasn't unusual for kids to wander off for a bit of adventure, maybe lose track of time playing in the woods behind the school. The police were called, of course, but it felt like a formality, something they did to calm everyone down. After all, nothing bad ever happened here. But then another message came through, just as strange as the one I had received earlier that morning. This time it wasn't just me who saw it. Parents all over town started getting the same message on their phones, a string of numbers that seemed random, 17, 42, 09. No explanation, no sender. The town was small enough that word spread fast. By evening, almost everyone had received the numbers. Some people brushed it off, others were confused, but most thought it was some kind of technical error. I remember sitting at my kitchen table that night, staring at the message, my unease growing. Emma was playing in the living room, oblivious to the strange tension that was slowly creeping into our lives. Liam was still missing by nightfall. His mother, Mrs. Harris, had organized a search with the help of neighbors and local authorities. They combed the woods, called out his name, checked every corner of the playground. But there was no sign of him. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. By the time I put Emma to bed, the air felt thick with worry, even though no one wanted to admit it. I tucked her in, kissed her forehead, and told her everything would be okay. I didn't really believe it, but what else could I say? As I sat in the dark of my living room later that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. The town, my town, the one I'd always known to be so peaceful, felt like it was on the brink of something terrible. And though I didn't know it yet, Liam Harris was only the beginning. The morning after Liam's disappearance, the entire town felt different. It wasn't just the absence of the usual laughter of children at the playground or the low murmurs of concerned parents waiting outside the school. It was something deeper, an invisible weight that pressed down on all of us. I walked Emma to school as usual, though this time her grip on my hand was a little tighter. She hadn't asked about Liam, but I knew she was aware of something being wrong. Children have a way of sensing things adults try to hide. At the school gates, parents huddled in small groups, their faces tense. Mrs. Harris, Liam's mother, was nowhere to be seen. I overheard fragments of conversation, words like runaway, lost in the woods, police are still looking. No one wanted to say out loud what we all feared, that something worse had happened. The day dragged on in a strange, uneasy blur. The town moved in slow motion, as if waiting for some kind of resolution that wouldn't come. I kept checking my phone, waiting for an update about Liam or for another one of those strange messages. Nothing came. Not yet, at least. By the afternoon, the police had begun searching beyond the woods. Helicopters circled overhead, and there were rumors that they brought in dogs to trace his scent. The local news vans had started to arrive, parking outside the school, reporters with grim expressions ready to broadcast the story to the wider world. A missing child in a small town always drew attention. Emma seemed quiet that evening, playing with her toys, but I could see the questions forming in her mind. "Mom," she asked finally, her voice soft, "do you think they'll find Liam?" I didn't know how to answer. I wanted to say yes, to reassure her that everything would be fine, but the truth was, I wasn't sure. "I hope so, sweetheart," I said instead, forcing a smile. "The police are doing everything they can." That night, after Emma was asleep, I found myself staring at my phone again, rereading the strange numbers from the day before. 17. 42. 09. They still meant nothing to me, but they felt ominous. As if they held some kind of answer we hadn't yet figured out. Just as I was about to put my phone down, it buzzed. A new message. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, expecting another string of numbers. But this time, it was different. The message simply said, "Are you watching?" A chill ran down my spine. I checked the sender, but like the previous messages, it was from an unknown number. I tried calling back, but it didn't go through. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. What did it mean? "Are you watching?" Watching what? I didn't sleep much that night. Every little sound outside made me jump, footsteps, the wind brushing against the trees, even the distant hum of the police helicopters still searching. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen, something worse than just one missing child. The next morning, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating on the bedside table. Another message. This one wasn't numbers, but a picture, a photo of the playground near Emma's school. It was empty, eerily still, except for something barely noticeable in the distance, a shadowy figure standing near the edge of the woods. I sat up, heart pounding. The photo had no caption, no explanation. Just the playground and that figure. I quickly dressed and rushed downstairs to check on Emma, who was still peacefully asleep in her bed, unaware of the growing nightmare around us. I couldn't tell anyone about the message. I didn't even know what to say or how to explain it without sounding paranoid. But I knew, deep down, that this wasn't random. It was connected to Liam's disappearance, and it wouldn't stop there. That day, another child went missing. Her name was Sarah Whitman, a quiet girl from Emma's class. Her parents had dropped her off at school like any other day, but by the time the final bell rang, she was gone. No one had seen her leave. No one had any idea where she might have gone. Panic swept through the town faster this time. 2 children missing within 2 days. It was no longer something we could chalk up to kids wandering off. Parents began pulling their children out of school, locking their doors, staying inside. The playgrounds were empty, the streets eerily silent. Even the usual flow of gossip had turned into something darker, more fearful. The search for Sarah began immediately, following the same routine as Liam's. But deep down, I think everyone knew what was happening now. These weren't accidents. These children weren't just lost. They were being taken. As I tucked Emma into bed that night, I couldn't shake the image of that shadowy figure in the playground. Who or what was it? Was it watching us, waiting for something? When I finally fell asleep, it was with one eye open, my phone gripped tightly in my hand. The town wasn't safe anymore. We were living in a nightmare. And it was only just beginning. By the 3rd day, fear had taken root in every corner of the town. It wasn't just the missing children, it was the eerie stillness that had settled over everything. People were afraid to leave their homes. Windows that used to be open to let in the autumn breeze were now closed, blinds drawn tight. The playgrounds, once full of life and laughter, stood empty like ghostly remnants of a happier time. The police set up a temporary headquarters near the town square, and the search for Sarah intensified. Every available officer, along with volunteers from neighboring towns, combed through the woods, retracing steps, calling out her name. But it was just like with Liam, there were no clues, no signs of a struggle, no trail to follow. It was as if the earth had swallowed them whole. Meanwhile, the messages kept coming. That morning, as I sipped my coffee, trying to keep myself grounded, my phone buzzed again. This time, the message was another string of numbers, but different from before. 21, 18, 15. I stared at it, my mind spinning with questions. What did these numbers mean? Were they times? Coordinates? Were they even connected to the disappearances, or was my mind playing tricks on me, trying to find meaning where there was none? I thought about telling the police, but what could I say? That I was getting cryptic messages from an unknown number? They'd probably chalk it up to a prank or some sick joke. And part of me wasn't even sure if it was real. I hadn't shown anyone the previous messages, maybe because I didn't want to acknowledge the growing fear gnawing at me. Later that day, I received a knock on my door. It was Mrs. Harris, Liam's mother. Her face looked hollow, drained of any hope. She asked if I had heard anything, seen anything at all that could lead her to her son. Her hands trembled as she spoke, her voice breaking with every word. I wanted to help, to give her something, but there was nothing I could offer. I hadn't seen Liam that day, hadn't noticed anything unusual other than the strange messages. I hesitated for a moment, then decided against telling her. What good would it do to add more uncertainty to her already broken world? Instead, I told her I'd keep an eye out, and if I saw or heard anything, I would let her know. As she walked away, I felt a deep, gut-wrenching guilt settle in. Was I doing the right thing by keeping this to myself? Or was I making a mistake that would cost more children their lives? That night, after Emma had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table, unable to sleep. The numbers 21, 18, 15-inch kept flashing in my mind. I opened my phone again, scrolling through the messages I'd received. Something about the sequence was haunting me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they meant something important. And then it clicked. What if the numbers weren't random at all? What if they were times? I quickly searched the times of the previous messages. The first one, 18:37:04, had come in the morning, right around the time Liam had gone missing. The second, 17:42:09, had been just before Sarah disappeared. Could the numbers be marking the exact times of the kidnappings? A cold wave of dread washed over me as the realization sank in. The latest message, 21:18:15, could be a warning telling me when the next child would be taken. It was already 8:30 in the evening. If my theory was right, I had less than an hour before it happened again. I jumped to my feet, heart pounding in my chest. I didn't know who the next target would be or where it would happen, but I couldn't just sit there and wait. I called the police, trying to explain my suspicion, but they were already stretched thin, and the officer on the phone was polite but dismissive. "We're doing everything we can, ma'am," he said. "If you have solid evidence, bring it to the station, but we can't act on speculation." Frustrated, I hung up and stood in the middle of my living room, my mind racing. I glanced at Emma, who was fast asleep in her bed, her small face peaceful and unaware of the terror unfolding around us. The thought of something happening to her made my stomach turn. I needed to do something, but I felt powerless. The town was too large to search in such a short amount of time, and I had no idea where to start. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed again. Another message. This time, it was different. "She's next." My heart nearly stopped. She? Who was she? Emma? Another child? Panic surged through me, and I bolted into Emma's room, my mind screaming at me to protect her, to hold her close. But when I got there, she was still asleep, tucked safely under her blankets, her breathing soft and steady. I stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do. Should I wake her up? Should I call someone? But who could help? The police weren't going to act on a cryptic text message, and I had no idea who was sending them. It could be a sick prank, or it could be something far worse. I decided not to wake Emma just yet, but I stayed by her side, watching her, waiting. My heart pounded with each passing minute. The clock on the wall ticked closer to 9:15. Tick. 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 The silence was suffocating. I strained my ears, listening for any sound outside, footsteps, a creak in the floorboards, anything. But all I heard was the distant hum of the night. And then, at exactly 9:18:15, my phone buzzed one last time. Too late. I ran to the window, peering out into the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. The street was empty, eerily still, the only light coming from the dim glow of the street lamps. There was no one there. No shadowy figure, no footsteps. Just silence. But the message had been clear. Whoever was behind this had just taken someone else. And now I knew this wasn't just a coincidence. It was deliberate. They were watching, planning, and they were always one step ahead. The days after the second disappearance felt like a blur of fear and confusion. Sarah was gone, just like Liam. Her parents were devastated, shattered beyond words. The town was now a place I barely recognized. Police lights flashed at every corner, and everyone walked with their heads down, avoiding eye contact, as if speaking to one another might somehow spread the curse that had fallen upon us. I couldn't get the last message out of my mind. Too late. Someone was watching. Someone knew exactly what was happening. But who? And why were they sending these messages to me? I wasn't special. I wasn't anyone of importance in this town. Why me? I started keeping Emma closer than ever. Every time I dropped her off at school, I felt a wave of anxiety wash over me. I'd stand there for a moment longer than usual, watching her disappear into the building, scanning the faces of other parents, the teachers, even strangers walking by, wondering if one of them knew something. Was one of them responsible? The police had started going door to door, asking questions, checking for any potential leads. But the searches turned up nothing. No suspects, no witnesses. The town was small, everyone knew each other, and yet it felt like we were surrounded by strangers. Everyone seemed to be hiding something. One evening, after another long day of waiting for news that never came, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, staring at my phone, hoping, dreading, that another message would come. The last few had been sparse, but each one more terrifying than the last. And yet, there was no more communication from the unknown sender. It was as if they were waiting for something. Emma had been quiet lately, too. She didn't talk much about Liam or Sarah, but I could tell the disappearances weighed on her. She stayed close to me, not wanting to play outside anymore, not asking to go to her friends' houses. The carefree joy she once had seemed to drain away, replaced by a cautious fear. It was as if the town itself had changed her, changed all of us. Late one night, I sat in bed, my mind racing with questions, when my phone vibrated. My heart nearly stopped. Another message. I hesitated, afraid to open it, but I couldn't stop myself. My hand shook as I unlocked my phone. The message was short, only 2 words, "It's coming." A chill ran down my spine. What was coming? Who was sending this? I wanted to scream into the silence of my house, to demand answers from whoever was playing this sick game, but there was no one to hear me. That night, sleep evaded me. I kept getting up to check the doors and windows, making sure everything was locked. I even peeked into Emma's room more than once, just to see her sleeping, to reassure myself that she was safe, for now. But I knew that wouldn't last. Whoever was behind this was playing a waiting game, and I could feel time slipping away. The next morning, I decided I couldn't keep this to myself any longer. I went to the police station with my phone, determined to show them the messages. Maybe they'd dismiss it again, but I had to try. I had to do something. Detective Harris, who had been assigned to the case, sat across from me in his cramped office. His eyes were bloodshot, his face pale with exhaustion. He was Liam's uncle, and I could tell this case had taken a personal toll on him. I placed my phone on his desk and showed him the messages. At first, he seemed skeptical, rubbing his temples as I explained the strange times and cryptic texts. But as he scrolled through the messages, his expression darkened. "You're saying you've been receiving these since the day Liam disappeared?" he asked, his voice low and hoarse. I nodded. "Yes. And look at the timestamps. The first message came right before Liam went missing. The second one before Sarah. And now this." I pointed to the most recent text, "It's coming." Detective Harris leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen. This could be some kind of sick joke, but his voice trailed off. I could tell he wasn't convinced it was just that. "It's not a joke," I said, my voice firm, though I was barely holding it together. "Something is happening. And I think whoever's behind this knows exactly what's going to happen next." He exhaled deeply, rubbing his hands across his face. "I'll get our tech guys to look into this, see if we can trace the number." But don't get your hopes up. Whoever's sending these knows how to cover their tracks. I left the station feeling no more reassured than before. The police were doing what they could, but they were as lost as the rest of us. Whatever was happening, it wasn't something they were prepared for. It wasn't something any of us were prepared for. That night, I received another message. This one was a picture, another photo of the playground. But this time, it was different. The shadowy figure was clearer, standing closer, more defined, like it was stepping out of the background and into focus. I couldn't see a face, but there was something wrong about it, something unnatural. It looked too tall, too thin, its limbs twisted and on angles, its posture hunched, like it didn't belong in our world. My breath caught in my throat. This thing, whatever it was getting closer. The next morning, the town woke to horrifying news. A third child had disappeared. Her name was Mia, a 9-year-old who lived just a few streets away from me. She had been walking home from a friend's house the evening before, but never made it back. Her parents found her backpack lying in the middle of the road, but no sign of Mia. Now, everyone in town knew for sure something was hunting our children. The messages had warned me, but I had done nothing. I hadn't been able to stop it. I felt the weight of guilt pressing down on me, suffocating. But I knew it wasn't over. Whoever, or whatever, was behind these disappearances, they weren't finished. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed awake, phone in hand, waiting, watching. The morning after Mia's disappearance, the entire town seemed to hold its breath. There was no longer any illusion that these were isolated incidents. Someone, was taking our children, and the community was beginning to fracture under the pressure. The local authorities were overwhelmed, the search efforts felt increasingly desperate, and the few remaining news crews still hanging around had begun to spin wild theories about kidnappers, cults, and even supernatural forces. I couldn't shake the images from the latest message. That figure, the twisted, unnatural form, haunted my thoughts. The more I stared at the photo, the less human it seemed. There was something wrong about the way it moved, its limbs too long, its posture too contorted. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, a distortion in the camera lens, but deep down, I knew better. The messages were coming faster now. I barely had time to process the fear before the next one arrived. That afternoon, as I sat in the living room, phone clutched in my hand, it buzzed again. This time, it was just a single word. Tonight. My stomach dropped. Tonight. What was going to happen tonight? Another disappearance? Another child gone? I felt a sudden surge of panic as I thought of Emma. I rushed into her room, where she was quietly playing with her dolls, oblivious to the terror swirling around her. I knelt beside her. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, my voice strained. "I need you to stay close to me tonight, okay? Don't leave the house, not for anything." She looked up at me, her big brown eyes filled with concern. "Is something wrong, Mommy?" I forced a smile, though it felt hollow. No, everything's fine. I just want you to stay safe. That's all." She nodded, though I could tell she wasn't entirely convinced. I hated that she had to live through this, that any of the children in this town had to. This was supposed to be their time to feel safe, to enjoy life, not to live in fear of disappearing into the night. By evening, the town had transformed into a fortress of paranoia. Parents refused to let their children out of their sight. The streets were deserted, doors bolted shut, windows covered. Even the police presence had intensified, patrol cars slowly moving through the neighborhoods, their headlights cutting through the thickening fog that had rolled in just after sunset. I kept Emma close to me, never letting her out of my sight for more than a few minutes. Every creak in the house, every gust of wind outside, made me jump. My phone felt heavy in my hand, like it held the weight of the entire night's terror. I kept waiting for it to buzz again, expecting another cryptic message, another warning of doom. As the hours ticked by, I tried to stay calm, but the silence felt oppressive, like something was waiting just beyond the edge of my awareness. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the thing from the photo was out there, somewhere in the fog, waiting for the right moment to strike. And then, just after midnight, it happened. The phone buzzed again, and I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. The message was short, but it felt like a death sentence. "It's here." I froze. My hands trembled as I read and reread the words. "It's here." What did that mean? Was it outside? Was it coming for us? I bolted to the window, my eyes scanning the street outside. The fog was thick, swirling in strange patterns under the streetlights. The houses across from mine were dark, their windows shut tight, but something felt wrong. There, at the edge of the street, barely visible through the fog, was a figure. My breath caught in my throat. The figure was standing completely still, just like in the photo, tall, thin, its limbs unnaturally long and twisted. It was watching. I could feel its gaze, even though I couldn't see its eyes. My skin prickled with fear, and I quickly pulled the curtain shut, my heart hammering in my chest. I backed away from the window, grabbing my phone again, my mind racing. I dialed the police, but the line was busy. They were overwhelmed. There was no one coming to help. I couldn't just wait here. I had to do something. I ran to Emma's room and scooped her up in my arms, trying to remain calm. "We're going to sleep in my room tonight, okay?" I whispered to her. She nodded sleepily, too tired to ask questions. I carried her back to my room and locked the door behind us, trying to think of what to do next. I felt trapped, powerless. Whatever that thing was outside, it was closer than ever, and I had no idea how to stop it. I sat on the bed, holding Emma close, listening to every sound. The wind howled outside, the fog pressing against the windows like some living thing, and I could swear I heard faint footsteps, soft, deliberate, coming closer. I checked my phone again, hoping for some new message, some clue about what to do. But there was nothing. Just silence. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. I didn't know how long I sat there, waiting, my heart pounding in my chest. But then, just as suddenly as the fear had come, the air in the room changed. It felt lighter, like whatever had been pressing down on us had lifted. I dared to stand up and peek through the curtains again. The street was empty. The figure was gone. The fog, too, had started to dissipate, leaving the town in a strange, eerie calm. But I knew this wasn't over. The message had said, "It's here." It had come, but it hadn't taken anything, not yet. And then, as if to confirm my worst fears, my phone buzzed one last time that night. I opened the message, my hands trembling, my heart already knowing what it would say. The words were simple, but they cut through me like ice. "She's next." I dropped the phone, my breath catching in my throat as I stared at Emma, peacefully asleep beside me. That night became a blur of raw panic and dread. My phone still lay on the floor, its screen dark, but the words from the last message echoed in my mind, repeating over and over. She's next. I couldn't let that happen. Emma, my little girl, was the next target, and I had no idea how to stop it. I stood frozen in my room, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. This was no ordinary kidnapping. This was something far worse, something beyond the realm of reason. But that didn't matter. I had to protect her, no matter what. I grabbed Emma and held her close, my mind racing. I couldn't stay here. That thing, whatever it was, knew where we were. It had been watching, waiting. We needed to leave. I didn't know where we could go, but staying felt like waiting for the inevitable. I hurried to the front door, glancing outside. The street was empty now, the fog mostly lifted, but the silence made it worse. I strained my ears for any sound, any sign that the figure might return. The neighborhood seemed abandoned, everyone locked inside their homes, praying they wouldn't be next. I stuffed a few essentials into a backpack, just enough to get us through the night. I wasn't thinking clearly. All I could focus on was getting Emma away from here. I hesitated for a moment, my hand on the door. What if it was waiting outside? What if this was part of the game? But I couldn't let fear paralyze me. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air, the chill biting through my thin jacket. "Come on, sweetheart," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. Emma was half asleep in my arms, too groggy to understand what was happening, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. She trusted me, and that trust was the only thing keeping me going. I had to be strong for her. We hurried down the street, my footsteps too loud in the dead of night. The entire town felt different now, as if it had transformed into something unfamiliar and menacing. Every shadow seemed to stretch too far, every corner felt like a hiding place for whatever had sent me those messages. My heart pounded in my chest, my nerves stretched to their breaking point. I didn't know where to go. The police? They hadn't helped so far, and even if they believed me now, how could they protect us from something like this? No, I needed to find somewhere safe, somewhere hidden. Suddenly, Emma stirred in my arms, her small voice breaking through the silence. "Mommy? Where are we going?" I forced a smile. "We're going somewhere safe, baby. Just stay with me, okay?" Her eyes flicked to the darkness around us, and she tightened her grip on my neck. "I'm scared." "I know," I whispered, my voice barely holding steady. "I am too." We continued walking, but something felt wrong. The air was thick with tension, like we were being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, and for a moment, I saw it, the figure, standing in the distance, barely visible in the shadows. It wasn't following us, not yet, but it was there, just waiting. Watching. I quickened my pace, my breath coming in shallow gasps. My mind was screaming at me to run, to hide, but where? The town, which once felt so familiar, had become a trap. Every road, every house felt like it could lead to the end. And then it hit me, there was one place. Somewhere no one would think to look. The old cabin outside of town, where my family used to go when I was younger. It had been abandoned for years, but the location was isolated, hidden in the woods. No one went there anymore. Without a second thought, I changed direction, heading toward the outskirts of town. The streets grew darker, the houses fewer and farther between. Emma was quiet now, sensing the urgency, clinging to me as I carried her through the cold. After what felt like hours of walking, the road turned into a dirt path, leading into the thick woods. The branches overhead blocked out what little moonlight there was, and the air grew colder, sharper. My legs burned with exhaustion, but I couldn't stop. Not now. Not when we were so close. Finally, the cabin came into view. It was smaller than I remembered, the windows broken, the wood rotting. But it was shelter, a place to hide. I kicked open the door, the wood splintering under the force, and hurried inside. The inside of the cabin was cold and damp, smelling of decay and dust. There was an old fireplace, long unused, and a few pieces of broken furniture scattered about. I set Emma down on a rickety chair, trying to calm my racing thoughts. We were safe here. At least, for now. But as I turned to lock the door, my phone buzzed again. I hesitated, dread pooling in my stomach. Another message. My fingers shook as I unlocked the screen. Too late. I stared at the words, my mind reeling. Too late. What did that mean? Was it already here? Was this part of the game? A soft sound echoed from outside, a faint creaking, like footsteps on the porch. My breath caught in my throat. I turned toward the door, heart pounding so hard it hurt. The air in the cabin seemed to grow colder, the silence heavier. And then I heard it, a slow, deliberate knock on the door. I backed away, grabbing Emma and pulling her behind me. My mind raced. What could I do? There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The door rattled again, louder this time, as if something was testing it, waiting for an invitation to come in. I wanted to scream, but the fear had stolen my voice. I clutched Emma to me, my body trembling. I could feel her small hands clutching my shirt, her breathing fast and shallow. The door creaked open, just a crack. I could see the shadowy figure through the gap, standing there, its twisted form hunched and unnatural. It didn't move, just stood there, watching. Waiting. And then, a voice, soft, almost soothing, whispered from the darkness. You can't run. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement, cold and final. My mind raced, but I couldn't think. The room felt smaller, the air tighter, and for a moment, everything seemed to freeze. But then, as if something inside me snapped, I grabbed the nearest object, an old, rusted fireplace poker, and held it up in front of me. My hands were shaking, but I refused to let go. You won't take her, I whispered, my voice barely audible, but filled with a desperation I hadn't known I had. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its gaze boring into me. And then, slowly, it began to retreat, stepping back into the shadows of the night. The door swung shut, and the cold, suffocating presence seemed to lift just slightly. But I knew this wasn't over. The thing had left, but only for now. It would be back. I sank to the floor, holding Emma tight, trying to control my breathing. I had fought it off this time, but how long could we keep running? How long before it caught up to us? I sat on the floor of the old cabin, trembling, my arms wrapped tightly around Emma. Her small body was pressed against mine, and I could feel the rapid rise and fall of her chest. The night outside was unnervingly silent now, as if the world itself had paused, waiting. The figure had gone, but its presence lingered like a shadow, filling every corner of the cabin with an unseen menace. The words from the last message, "Too late," echoed in my mind. What did it mean? Too late for what? My thoughts spiraled as I tried to make sense of everything. This thing, this creature, it wasn't just some person. There was something otherworldly about it, something unnatural that defied logic. I glanced down at Emma, her eyes half closed, exhausted but still clinging to me. She was so young, too young to be caught up in something like this. The fear in her eyes earlier had crushed me, and the thought of her being taken by that thing made my stomach churn. I couldn't let it happen. But what was I supposed to do? Every instinct in my body screamed to run, to hide, to keep moving, but I was exhausted. My legs ached, and my mind was foggy from lack of sleep. And yet, stopping meant surrendering to the inevitable. This cabin wasn't safe, nothing was. I stood up slowly, trying to gather my thoughts. The cabin was cold, the wind outside whistling through the cracks in the walls, but at least we had a few hours before daylight. Maybe by then, we could find help, figure out a plan. But deep down, I knew that sunlight wouldn't stop this thing. It wasn't bound by day or night. It had been watching us for days, picking its moments, creeping closer with each disappearance. The fireplace poker still lay on the floor where I had dropped it. I picked it up again, gripping it tightly. It wasn't much, but it was something, a small illusion of control. I walked over to the window, peering through the broken glass into the darkness outside. The trees loomed like silent sentinels, their branches swaying in the wind. Every shadow felt alive, every movement a potential threat. But there was nothing. No figure. No eyes watching from the edge of the woods. Just an eerie, almost suffocating stillness. Emma stirred behind me, her voice a soft, sleepy murmur. "Mommy, is it gone?" I turned back to her, forcing a smile. "For now, baby. But we have to stay quiet, okay? We need to be safe." She nodded, her trust in me unwavering, even though I felt anything but certain. I walked over and sat beside her, pulling her into my lap, trying to provide whatever comfort I could. My heart ached for her. This wasn't a world she should be living in, one where nightmares came to life. Time passed slowly. The darkness seemed endless, and I found myself jumping at every creak, every gust of wind that rattled the cabin. My phone remained silent, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before another message arrived, each one worse than the last. I glanced at the time, 3 in the morning. The night still stretched long before us. Every instinct told me to stay awake, to stay alert, but exhaustion was creeping in. My eyelids felt heavy, and I fought against the urge to close them. I couldn't sleep. I wouldn't sleep. If I did, I might wake up to find Emma gone, taken by that thing. But sleep is insidious, creeping in when you least expect it. I must have dozed off, because the next thing I knew, I woke with a start, my heart pounding in my chest. The cabin was dark, too dark, and for a moment, I didn't know where I was. But then, the fear rushed back in, slamming into me like a wave. I scrambled up, looking around wildly. Emma was still beside me, her small body curled up on the floor, fast asleep. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. Something was wrong. The air in the cabin felt different, colder, heavier, like the weight of something unseen pressing down on me. And then I heard it. A soft, almost imperceptible scraping sound coming from outside the cabin. My heart stopped. The noise was faint, but unmistakable. Something was moving around the perimeter of the cabin, slow and deliberate, like it was testing the boundaries, searching for a way in. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. I gripped the fireplace poker tightly, my knuckles white, trying to keep my breathing steady. I couldn't let Emma wake up. If she did, she would panic, and we couldn't afford that right now. The sound grew louder, closer. It was right outside the window now, the soft crunch of leaves underfoot, the faint rustle of branches. I glanced toward the door, considering making a run for it, But where would we go? The thing had found us once. It would find us again. And then, without warning, the noise stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, oppressive. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of movement, but there was nothing. The air felt thick, like it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Suddenly, the window beside me shattered with a loud crash. I screamed, instinctively pulling Emma to me as the glass rained down. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might explode. For a moment, I couldn't move, my body frozen in pure terror. And then I saw it. Through the broken window, the figure was there, standing just outside, its twisted form illuminated by the faint light of the moon. It was closer now, so much closer than before, and its shape seemed even more unnatural, its limbs impossibly long and distorted. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, watching us through the jagged frame of the window. I could feel its gaze, cold and relentless, piercing through the darkness. My blood turned to ice, and for a second, I thought I might pass out from the sheer weight of the fear crushing down on me. But then, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to just sit here and wait for it to take Emma. I had to do something, anything, to protect her. Gripping the fireplace poker with both hands, I moved toward the window, my body trembling with adrenaline. The figure didn't react, didn't move. It just watched. I took a deep breath and swung the poker as hard as I could, smashing it against the frame of the window. The wood splintered, and I heard a strange, inhuman sound, like a low growl, echo through the night. The figure took a step back, retreating into the shadows, but it wasn't gone. I knew it was still there, lurking just beyond the reach of the light, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Stay back," I shouted, my voice shaking with fear and desperation. "Stay away from us." For a moment, there was silence. And then, in a voice so quiet it was barely a whisper, I heard it speak. "You can't stop me." The words sent a chill down my spine. I gripped the poker tighter, my hand shaking. It was toying with us, playing some sick game, and I had no idea how to win. The figure melted back into the shadows, disappearing from view. But I knew it wasn't gone. It was waiting, watching. I collapsed onto the floor, pulling Emma close to me, my body shaking with fear and exhaustion. I had bought us a little more time, but how much longer could we survive? As I held Emma, her soft breathing the only thing anchoring me to the moment, I realized something with a cold, sinking certainty. Emma stirred beside me, slowly waking up. Her face, pale and innocent, was a reminder of what I was fighting for. I brushed a strand of hair from her face and forced a smile, though it felt hollow. "Good morning, sweetheart," I whispered. She blinked, her small hands rubbing her eyes. "Mommy, are we going home?" Her words pierced through me like a knife. Home? I didn't even know where that was anymore. The safety of our home felt like a distant memory, swallowed by the nightmare that had overtaken us. But I couldn't tell her that. "Not yet, baby," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We need to stay here a little longer." Emma didn't respond. She simply nodded and buried her face in my lap, seeking the comfort of my presence. I stroked her hair, trying to calm the storm of emotions brewing inside me. I had to figure something out. We couldn't stay here forever. Sooner or later, that thing would come back. I stood up slowly, careful not to wake Emma as I moved. The air in the cabin was damp and cold, and every creak of the floorboards made me jump. I needed to think, to come up with some kind of plan, but my mind felt sluggish, like it was wading through thick fog. I checked my phone, the screen glowing dimly in the faint light. There were no new messages, no updates, but that didn't bring any comfort. The silence felt more ominous than any threat. What was it waiting for? I looked around the small cabin, searching for anything that could help us. There wasn't much, just a few old, broken chairs, some rotting wood, and an empty fireplace. The place had clearly been abandoned for years, forgotten by the world. Just like we were now. But then I remembered something. The cabin had a cellar, a small, cramped space beneath the floor. It wasn't much, but it could offer us a hiding spot if the figure returned. I moved to the corner of the room where the trapdoor was hidden beneath a tattered rug. My hand shook as I lifted the door, revealing the narrow staircase that led down into the dark. I hesitated, peering into the blackness below. The air that rose from the cellar was damp and stale, and the thought of hiding down there made my skin crawl. But what choice did we have? It was better than sitting here, waiting for the inevitable. I went back to Emma and gently shook her awake. She blinked up at me, confused and still groggy. "Come on, sweetheart," I whispered. "We need to go somewhere safe." Emma didn't argue. She let me lift her into my arms as I carried her toward the cellar. The darkness inside was suffocating, but I forced myself to keep moving. We needed to hide, to stay out of sight until I could figure out what to do next. The stairs creaked under our weight as we descended into the cellar. The air down here was even colder, and the walls were damp with condensation. It was cramped, the ceiling low enough that I had to crouch slightly. There were no windows, no light except for the faint glow of my phone's screen. I set Emma down on an old blanket that had been left behind by whoever had used the cabin last. She looked up at me with wide, frightened eyes, but didn't say anything. I knelt beside her, pulling her close to me. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of her breathing. "Mommy, I'm scared," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know, baby," I said, my voice cracking. "I'm scared too." We stayed like that for what felt like hours, huddled together in the darkness. I tried to keep my mind focused, to think of something, anything, that could help us. But every time I thought I had an idea, it slipped away, lost in the fog of fear and exhaustion. Eventually, I checked my phone again. The battery was low, but there was still no message. The absence of a new text only deepened my sense of dread. I didn't know what was worse, the anticipation or the actual appearance of the figure. Both were unbearable in their own way. Suddenly, Emma sat up, her eyes wide with alarm. "Mommy, I hear something." I froze, my blood running cold. I strained my ears, listening for any sound. At first, there was nothing but the quiet hum of silence, but then I heard it too, a faint scraping sound, like something being dragged across the floor above us. It was here. The figure had found us again. I pressed a finger to my lips, signaling Emma to stay quiet. She nodded, her body trembling as she clung to me. My heart raced, pounding so loudly I was sure the thing above could hear it. The scraping grew louder, closer, as if it was searching for us. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan, but there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. And then the footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was more terrifying than the noise itself. I held my breath, waiting for something, anything, to happen. But there was nothing. The figure wasn't moving, wasn't making a sound. I checked my phone again, praying that it wouldn't buzz or light up. But as I did, a new message appeared on the screen. Why are you hiding? My stomach dropped. The figure knew we were here. It was toying with us, playing a sick, twisted game. I gripped my phone tightly, my mind racing. What could I do? How could I stop it? Another message appeared almost immediately after. It's no use. I could feel my breath quickening, my heart pounding in my chest. The walls of the cellar seemed to close in on me, the air thick and suffocating. I had no idea how to fight this, how to protect Emma from something so relentless, so malevolent. But I couldn't give up. Not yet. I had to face it. Taking a deep breath, I stood up, careful not to make too much noise. Emma's eyes widened in fear as she looked up at me, but I forced myself to smile, trying to reassure her. Stay here, I whispered. I'll be right back. No, Mommy. Emma grabbed my arm, her grip tight with panic. Don't leave me. I'll be quick, I promise. I just need to check, okay? Her lip quivered, but she nodded, reluctantly letting go. I kissed her forehead and then, with shaking hands, I began to climb the stairs back up into the cabin. The air felt thick with dread as I reached the top of the stairs. I hesitated for a moment, listening for any movement. There was nothing, just the eerie stillness that had settled over the cabin. But I knew it was there, waiting for me. Slowly, I pushed open the trapdoor and stepped into the room above. Everything looked the same as it had before, the broken furniture, the cold hearth, the shattered window. But the sense of being watched was overwhelming. I could feel its eyes on me, even though I couldn't see it. I scanned the room, my eyes darting to every shadow, every dark corner. And then, in the corner of the room, just out of sight, I saw it. The figure. It was standing there, its twisted form hunched and distorted, blending into the darkness. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at it, frozen in place. I could feel the cold, suffocating presence of it seeping into my bones. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me with those hollow, empty eyes. And then, in a voice that chilled me to the core, it spoke. You can't save her. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. My heart sank as the weight of the truth hit me like a punch to the gut. I couldn't save Emma. I couldn't save any of them. All the children that had disappeared, all the parents that had received those messages, they had all faced the same truth. There was no escape. No way to fight back. The figure would take what it wanted, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The bitter truth settled over me like a shroud, suffocating and cold. I had failed. Emma would be next, just like the others. And there was nothing I could do. The air in the room felt as though it had been drained of warmth, leaving only a bone-chilling cold. My legs felt like they were rooted to the floor, unable to move. I stared at the figure in the corner, its form twisted, misshapen, as if it didn't belong in this world. The weight of its words pressed down on me like a suffocating fog. You can't save her. The sentence echoed in my mind, repeating over and over, each time sharper, more brutal. My stomach churned, a pit of despair opening inside me. The urge to scream, to cry, to do something clawed at me, but I was paralyzed by fear, by the truth that had finally settled in. This thing, this presence, it wasn't just toying with us. It was inevitable. No matter how far we ran, no matter how hard I tried, it would always find us. It would always win. But I couldn't give up. Not yet. I had to try, even if it felt hopeless. I glanced at the shattered window, the jagged glass still clinging to the frame, and considered fleeing. But where would we go? Into the woods? The town wasn't far, but I had no guarantee that this thing wouldn't follow us. It had found us at home. It had found us here. It would find us again. The figure didn't move. Its stillness was more unsettling than if it had lunged toward me. It just stood there, watching, waiting, as if it already knew the outcome. I felt its gaze bore into me, stripping away every ounce of hope I had left. My breaths came in shallow, ragged gasps as I clutched the fireplace poker tighter. It was a pathetic weapon against something like this, but it was all I had. Suddenly, a faint sound broke the silence, a soft, rhythmic tapping. At first, I thought it was my imagination, the fear playing tricks on my mind. But no, the sound grew louder, more distinct. I realized with horror that it wasn't coming from outside, but from below. Emma. I had told her to stay in the cellar, hidden, safe. But now, as the tapping continued, I knew she wasn't alone down there. Something was in the cellar with her. I snapped out of my paralysis, my heart thundering in my chest. Without thinking, I turned and rushed toward the trapdoor, my hands trembling as I yanked it open. The stale, cold air rushed up to meet me, carrying with it the unmistakable feeling of dread. Emma! I called, my voice strained with panic. Emma, are you there? No answer. Only the tapping. I descended the stairs as quickly as I could, almost stumbling in my haste. The cellar was pitch black, the small glow from my phone barely illuminating the cramped space. My eyes frantically searched the darkness for Emma, but all I could see were shadows, thick and impenetrable. Emma! I called again, my voice rising with fear. And then I saw her. She was standing in the far corner of the cellar, facing the wall, her back to me. Her small body was motionless, her arms hanging limply at her sides. The tapping was coming from her, a slow, deliberate rhythm as she gently tapped the tips of her fingers against the cold, damp stone of the wall. A chill ran down my spine. Emma? I whispered, my voice shaking. Sweetheart, what are you doing? She didn't respond. She didn't move. The tapping continued, the soft, repetitive sound filling the small space with an eerie, rhythmic echo. I took a step closer, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. Something was wrong. Terribly wrong. This wasn't Emma. Not anymore. As I moved closer, I noticed something strange about her posture. It was stiff, unnatural, as though her limbs were being controlled by something unseen. My breath caught in my throat as I realized that the way she stood, rigid, almost lifeless, reminded me of the figure upstairs. My hands trembled as I reached out toward her, desperate to break whatever spell had taken hold of my little girl. Emma, I whispered again, my voice barely a breath. Please, come to me. She stopped tapping. Slowly, she turned around to face me, her movements unnervingly mechanical, like a puppet on strings. When her eyes met mine, I gasped, stumbling back in horror. Her eyes, Emma's eyes, were gone. In their place were two empty voids, black and hollow, just like the figure's eyes. There was no recognition, no emotion in her face. Just a blank, soulless expression that chilled me to the bone. Emma? I choked out, tears welling in my eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, but the voice that came out wasn't hers. You can't save her, the voice hissed, echoing the words the figure had spoken upstairs. It was a voice that belonged to the darkness itself, a voice that dripped with malice and cruelty. I backed away, my heart racing, my mind unable to process what was happening. This wasn't Emma. It was something else. Something had taken her. The figure had gotten to her, just like it had gotten to all the others. "Give her back," I whispered, my voice shaking with rage and grief. "Give her back to me." The thing that had taken my daughter smiled, a cold, twisted smile that made my blood run cold. "She's mine now," it said, its voice a hollow, empty mockery of Emma's sweet tone. "You can't save her. You never could." The truth hit me like a tidal wave, crashing down with the full weight of inevitability. I had failed. All this time, all this running, all this fighting, it had all been for nothing. The thing had taken her. It had won. I dropped to my knees, the strength draining from my body. The poker slipped from my grasp, clattering to the floor. My vision blurred with tears as I looked at the thing that wore my daughter's face, my heart breaking into a million pieces. "Please," I whispered, my voice cracking with desperation. "Please, give her back." But the thing only laughed, a cold, cruel sound that echoed through the dark cellar. It turned its back on me, resuming its slow, rhythmic tapping against the wall. Each tap felt like a nail being driven into my soul. I had lost her. I had lost everything. I knelt there in the darkness, sobbing, the weight of the bitter truth pressing down on me like a suffocating blanket. There was no escape, no salvation. The thing had won. As I sat there, broken and defeated, the cellar seemed to close in around me, the shadows growing darker, thicker, until they swallowed everything. And then, with one final whisper, the thing spoke again. "Now, it's your turn." The cellar plunged into complete darkness, and I felt the cold, suffocating presence envelop me. The tapping stopped. And in that moment, I knew there was no escape from this nightmare. We were all lost. The darkness enveloped me completely, suffocating and heavy, like a thick fog that pressed against my chest, making it hard to breathe. Panic surged within me, pushing me to fight against the shadows, but my body felt paralyzed, as if I were trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. "Emma!" I screamed, my voice echoing in the abyss, but there was no response. The empty void surrounding me swallowed my cries, leaving only silence. I clawed at the air, desperate to break free from the grasp of the darkness that had taken my daughter. But as I sat there, lost in the void, I began to feel something else, a flicker of determination igniting within the depths of my despair. This wasn't just about Emma. It was about all the children who had vanished, about the families torn apart by this malevolent force. I couldn't let it win. I had to fight back. In that moment of resolve, I remembered the poker. I forced myself to focus, to find the strength to stand. My hands fumbled in the darkness until I felt the cold metal beneath my fingers. Gripping it tightly, I stood up, my heart racing. "Show yourself." I shouted into the darkness, my voice steady despite the fear coursing through my veins. "You want me? Come and face me." The shadows shifted, swirling around me, and I could feel its presence drawing closer, the air growing colder with each passing second. I could sense it moving, slinking like a predator, eager to strike. Suddenly, a piercing scream rang out, a sound that echoed through the dark and shattered my resolve. It was Emma. "Mommy," she cried, her voice filled with terror. "No!" I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat. I surged forward, following the sound of her voice, the poker raised above my head. I was ready to confront whatever lay ahead. As I stumbled through the darkness, The shadows seemed to come alive, reaching for me with icy fingers. I fought against the chill, forcing myself to move, to push through the fear. "Emma!" I yelled again, my heart pounding in my chest. "I'm coming!" Finally, I burst through the veil of darkness, emerging into a small, dimly lit room. The air was heavy with a suffocating sense of dread, and my heart sank as I took in the scene before me. Emma stood in the center of the room, her back to me, frozen in place as if entranced by something beyond my sight. The walls were covered in strange symbols, drawn in what looked like dried blood. A chilling wind whipped around the room, carrying with it the faint sound of whispers, words I couldn't quite understand, but they filled me with a sense of foreboding. "Emma!" I cried, rushing toward her. As I moved closer, I could see the dark figure standing just behind her, looming like a shadow. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the dim light like two empty voids, and I could feel the malice radiating off of it. "Stay away from her!" I shouted, raising the poker as I prepared to confront the figure. It turned its head slowly, the movement eerily fluid, and for a moment I saw something flash in those hollow eyes, something almost human, twisted and warped by darkness. "You're too late," it hissed, its voice slithering through the air like smoke. "She is mine now." "No!" I screamed, charging forward, fueled by an overwhelming need to save my daughter. I swung the poker, aiming for the figure, but it vanished into thin air, leaving only a chilling laugh that echoed in the room. In that instant, I realized this thing was not just a monster, it was a manifestation of fear itself, feeding on the despair and anguish that had taken hold of me. It thrived on my helplessness, on the love I had for my daughter. I had to change the game. I couldn't let it control me anymore. "Emma!" I shouted, forcing my voice to stay steady. "You have to fight it. You're stronger than it is. You can break free." For a moment, there was silence. The shadows flickered around us, and I held my breath, hoping against hope that my words could reach her. Emma's shoulders shook as if she were fighting against an invisible force. I could see the struggle on her face, the way her brows furrowed in concentration. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice trembling. I can't." "Yes, you can," I urged, stepping closer. "Remember who you are. You're my brave girl. You can fight it." The figure hissed, a sound filled with rage and frustration. It surged forward, but I raised the poker, ready to defend my daughter. Suddenly, Emma turned toward me, her eyes wide and pleading. "I want to go home, Mommy," she cried. "Then come to me," I shouted, my heart aching at the sight of her struggling. "Just take my hand." With a fierce determination, she took a step forward, breaking free from the grip of the shadows. I held out my hand, willing her to come closer. The figure roared in anger, shadows swirling violently around it, but Emma took another step, then another. "Mommy," she cried, rushing toward me. I reached out, grabbing her small hand just as the figure lunged. A blinding light enveloped us, and I felt a surge of warmth, as if the darkness itself was being pushed back. "Hold on, Emma," I shouted, pulling her close. The shadows screamed, a deafening sound that pierced through the air as the light grew brighter. I squeezed Emma's hand tighter, feeling her warmth against my skin, anchoring me to reality. Together, we faced the encroaching darkness. And then, in an explosion of light, it shattered. The figure was consumed, its scream echoing through the room as it was torn apart by the brightness. The walls shook, the symbols on the wall flaring to life before disintegrating into nothingness. and then silence. The room fell still, and the oppressive darkness dissipated, leaving us standing in a small, warm space. I blinked, momentarily disoriented, and then turned to Emma, my heart racing with relief. "Are you okay, sweetheart?" I asked, brushing my hands through her hair. She nodded, her eyes wide but shining with a new clarity. "I'm okay, Mommy." Tears of joy streamed down my face as I enveloped her in my arms, holding her tightly as if I could shield her from the horrors we had just faced. We were alive. We were together. But then, a thought pierced through my joy, chilling me to the core. The fight wasn't over. "Emma, we need to get out of here," I said, pulling away to look into her eyes. "We can't stay." We rushed to the door, pushing it open to find ourselves back in the cabin. The sunlight flooded in, illuminating the room in a warm glow that felt foreign after the darkness we had just escaped. I glanced back at Emma, who still held my hand tightly. "Are you ready?" I asked, my heart pounding. She nodded, her grip firm. "Let's go." Together, we stepped outside, into the world that felt alive once again. The air was fresh, filled with the sounds of birds singing and leaves rustling. But as we stepped onto the porch, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The forest loomed around us, dark and foreboding, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't safe yet. The figure could still be out there, waiting in the shadows. We began to move, walking quickly toward the path that led away from the cabin, away from the darkness. My heart raced, every instinct screaming for us to run. And then I heard it, a soft, familiar voice echoing through the trees. "Help me." I froze, my heart dropping as I recognized the sound. It was a child's voice, pleading and filled with despair. "Mommy?" Emma whispered, her grip tightening on my hand. I looked down at her, fear mingling with determination. "We can't help them," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "We have to keep moving." But the voice grew louder, more insistent. "Help me, please." Against my better judgment, I turned toward the sound, my heart aching with empathy for the lost child. "Emma, wait here," I said, my voice firm. "I need to see what's happening." "Don't go, Mommy," Emma cried, fear lacing her tone. I hesitated for a moment, torn between the instinct to protect my daughter and the pull of the voice calling out in desperation. "I'll be right back," I promised. "Just stay here." I took a deep breath and stepped into the trees, the shadows looming around me once again. "Hello?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Where are you?" The voice continued to plead, echoing through the trees. "Help me. I'm scared." I pushed further into the woods, the underbrush thick and tangled around my legs. My heart raced as I followed the sound, each step pulling me deeper into the shadows. "Please," the voice begged, and I felt a chill run down my spine. It sounded so real, so full of anguish. I couldn't ignore it. As I moved deeper into the forest, the trees began to close in around me. The sunlight faded, swallowed by the thick canopy above. I could feel the weight of the darkness pressing in on me, and I fought against the urge to turn back. "Where are you?" I called out again, desperation lacing my voice. "Help me," the voice echoed, sending a shiver down my spine. I finally reached a clearing, and in the center stood a small figure, hunched over, shrouded in shadows. My heart raced as I took a cautious step forward. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What's wrong?" The figure lifted its head, and I felt my blood run cold. It wasn't a child. The thing that stood before me wore the shape of a child, but its eyes glowed with the same emptiness I had seen before. Its smile twisted, a grotesque imitation of innocence that sent a chill down my spine. "Help me," it whispered, its voice a sickening mockery of the child I had expected. "No," I gasped, taking a step back. "You're not real." "Oh, but I am," it said, stepping forward with an unsettling grace. "I'm everything you've lost. Everything you fear." Panic surged within me as I turned to flee, but the shadows closed in, wrapping around me like chains. I was trapped. "Mommy!" I heard Emma's voice call from the edge of the woods. "Emma!" I screamed, my heart racing. "Get away!" The shadow child laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the trees. "You can't protect her, you know. She's already mine." "No!" I shouted, my fear igniting a fierce determination within me. "I won't let you take her." With every ounce of strength I had left, I broke free from the shadow's grip and lunged toward the figure, poker raised high. "Get away from her." But as I swung, the shadow child vanished, dissipating into the darkness. "Help me," the voice echoed, fading into silence. I stumbled forward, breathless and terrified, racing back toward Emma. "Mommy," she cried again, and I could hear her fear echoing through the trees. I burst into the clearing where I had left her, and my heart dropped at what I saw. Emma stood frozen, staring into the darkness, her eyes wide with fear. The shadows swirled around her, coiling like snakes, their whispers rising in a cacophony of torment. "Emma, run!" I yelled, but my voice was drowned out by the haunting whispers. "Help me," they called, mimicking the voice I had heard before. "No!" I shouted, racing toward her, my heart pounding in my chest. The shadows lunged, wrapping around her legs, but I reached her just in time, gripping her tightly as I pulled her away. "Stay close to me," I cried, my voice firm despite the terror clawing at my heart. We ran together, weaving through the trees, the darkness pursuing us like a living entity. I could feel its breath on my neck, could hear the whispers growing louder, more insistent. "Help me," they called, echoing all around us. But I couldn't stop. I had to protect Emma. With every ounce of strength I had, I pushed forward, breaking through the trees and emerging into the sunlight. We burst into the open, panting, and I turned to look back, expecting to see the shadows following us. But they stopped at the edge of the woods, hissing and swirling like angry smoke, unable to cross into the light. "We did it," I whispered, relief washing over me as I looked down at Emma. "We're safe." But as I pulled her close, I felt a chill run down my spine. The figure's laughter echoed in my mind, a haunting reminder that this fight was far from over. "We need to keep moving," I said, glancing around for any signs of danger. "We can't let it catch us again." Emma nodded, her eyes still wide with fear. "Where do we go?" "Anywhere but here," I replied, taking her hand. "We need to find help, to warn the others." We began to move, my heart racing as I led her away from the forest. But even as we walked, the feeling of dread lingered in the air. I could sense the darkness watching, waiting for another chance to strike. With every step, I knew we were not just running from the shadows, we were racing against time. The town was close, and I could only hope that we would find safety before it was too late. The sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows that stretched across the ground, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being hunted. As we made our way back toward town, I could hear the distant sound of children laughing, their voices filled with innocence. A pang of longing twisted in my heart, and I felt the weight of every child who had vanished, their laughter now silent. "We have to warn them, Emma," I said, my voice filled with urgency. "We can't let this happen to anyone else." But as we approached the town, the laughter faded, replaced by an unsettling stillness. The streets were eerily quiet, the shadows stretching longer, more menacing in the fading light. "Mommy, I'm scared," Emma whispered, clutching my hand tightly. "I know, sweetheart," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "But we have to be brave. We're almost there." As we turned the corner, I felt a chill run through the air. The familiar sights of the town felt foreign, twisted somehow. The lights flickered, casting ominous shadows that danced along the sidewalks. "Stay close," I warned, scanning the area for any signs of danger. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the shadows, and I froze, my heart racing. It was a man, his face hidden beneath a dark hood. "Help me," he whispered, his voice low and filled with desperation. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up as a sense of dread washed over me. "Who are you?" I demanded, keeping Emma behind me. "Please," he begged, taking a step closer. "You have to help me. They're coming for me." "Who's coming?" I asked, my heart racing. But before he could answer, another figure appeared behind him, and then another. The shadows seemed to grow thicker, swirling around us like a living entity. "Help me," they echoed, their voices a haunting chorus that filled the air with terror. I turned to run, but the shadows reached out, wrapping around my legs, pulling me back. I struggled, my heart racing as I tried to break free, but it was no use. "Emma!" I shouted, desperation clawing at my throat. "Run!" But she stood frozen, her eyes wide with fear as the shadows surrounded her. "Mommy!" she cried, reaching for me. "No!" I screamed, fighting against the darkness, but it was too strong. It dragged me backward, away from her. In that moment, I realized the truth. The darkness was not just a force, it was a predator, and we were its prey. "Emma!" I shouted, my heart breaking as I watched her slip further away. "I'm coming for you. I won't let it take you." But the shadows closed in, swallowing her cries as the world around me faded into darkness once more. I awoke in the depths of despair, the darkness pressing on me like a heavy weight. I felt disoriented, as if I were trapped in a nightmare from which I couldn't awaken. Panic surged through me, and I forced myself to sit up, my heart racing as I looked around. I was alone, the shadows wrapping around me like tendrils of fear, but Emma was gone. "Emma!" I screamed, my voice echoing into the void, but there was only silence in return. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I fought against the overwhelming sense of loss and helplessness. The darkness had taken her, and I was left to face it alone. But I couldn't give up. I couldn't allow the shadows to win. I would find her. With a surge of determination, I rose to my feet, my mind racing. I had to confront the darkness, had to face the thing that had taken my daughter and so many others. As I began to move, I felt a pulse of energy, a flicker of light in the distance. I followed it, my heart pounding in my chest, each step filled with dread but also a glimmer of hope. The light grew brighter as I approached, illuminating a clearing filled with swirling shadows. In the center stood a dark figure, its form shifting and twisting like smoke. "Come to me," it beckoned, its voice seductive and filled with malice. "Join us." "No!" I shouted, my voice steady with defiance. I won't let you take me. The figure laughed, a sound that chilled me to the bone. You think you can resist? You've already lost. Not yet, I replied, clutching the poker tightly in my hands. I won't give in to you. The figure moved closer, its form coiling like a serpent. I could see the outlines of other faces trapped within it, faces of the lost children, their eyes wide with terror. Help me, they whispered, their voices merging into a haunting chorus. No! I yelled, shaking my head. I won't let you take me. With a fierce cry, I charged forward, swinging the poker at the figure. It shrieked, the sound piercing through the air as I struck, the metal connecting with something solid. The figure twisted in pain, shadows writhing around it like a storm. You can't stop me, it roared, the darkness pulsating with rage. But I wouldn't back down. I swung again and again, fueled by my love for Emma and the other lost souls. With each blow, the shadows weakened, the figure's form flickering as if it were made of smoke. Emma! I screamed, my voice rising above the chaos. I'm coming for you. I won't let it keep you. With one final swing, I plunged the poker into the center of the figure, and a blinding light erupted, illuminating the entire clearing. The figure screamed, a sound filled with rage and despair, and the darkness shattered like glass, fragments of shadows scattering into the air. I felt a surge of power rush through me, the warmth enveloping me as I stood in the light. The whispers faded, replaced by a profound silence. Mommy, a small voice called, and I turned, my heart leaping with hope. Emma stood at the edge of the clearing, her eyes shining with tears but filled with determination. Mommy, she cried, rushing toward me. I dropped the poker, my heart swelling with relief as I swept her into my arms, holding her tightly. I thought I lost you, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. I'm here, she said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. I knew you would come for me. We stood together in the light, the darkness retreating, and for the first time, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. Let's go home, I said, pulling back to look into her eyes. Together. As we turned to leave the clearing, I could feel the shadows receding, fading into the distance. But I knew we weren't just leaving the darkness behind, we were stepping into a new beginning. The sun rose over the horizon, casting golden light across the landscape. Emma and I stood hand in hand, watching as the shadows of the night dissipated into the morning light. We did it, Mommy, she said, her voice filled with awe. Yes, we did, I replied, my heart swelling with pride. We had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but I knew the journey was far from over. The scars of our battle would remain, but they would serve as a reminder of our strength and resilience. As we walked back toward the town, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. I would share our story, warn others about the darkness that lurked in the shadows. But most importantly, I would cherish the moments with my daughter, knowing that our bond had been forged in the fires of adversity. Together, we would face whatever challenges lay ahead, hand in hand, united against the darkness. The Forgotten Past. Have you ever felt a strange pull to revisit the place you once called home, even when every logical thought screams against it? It was years since I'd set foot in my hometown, a place cloaked in memories I had tried so hard to leave behind. But as if guided by some unseen force, I found myself returning, almost against my will, to this small, dreary town. My name is Daniel, and I was only 12 when my family left. Now, a grown man, I told myself it was time to confront my past. It was just a small town in the middle of nowhere, so why did it feel so ominous? The air was heavy, almost as if the town itself had secrets it didn't want to reveal. As I drove through the winding streets, I noticed something strange. The town hadn't changed much physically, but there was an unexplainable feeling, an unsettling silence that seemed to follow me everywhere. The usual small town sights, old wooden houses, empty streets, and the general store looked familiar but distorted, like faded remnants of another world. My plan was simple: spend a night or two, revisit a few places, and leave. But on my first night, as I walked through the dimly lit streets, I saw faces that stirred faint, unsettling memories. Old neighbors, schoolmates, many of whom had grown up and moved on, but some faces seemed stuck in time, unchanged, as though they hadn't aged a day. At the edge of town, I caught sight of the house where I'd grown up. It was still standing, its silhouette against the night sky both nostalgic and disturbing. Something about it looked wrong, like it was watching me, aware of my presence. The house had been abandoned for years, or so I thought. Its cracked windows and peeling paint looked like any other old, forgotten building. But as I got closer, I felt a prickling unease run down my spine, as though I were being observed. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just nerves. But then I saw something in the window on the second floor, a flash of movement, gone almost as quickly as it appeared. I paused, my heart pounding. Was it just my imagination? The rational part of me wanted to leave, turn back and pretend I hadn't seen anything. Yet something held me there. Maybe it was the sense of familiarity mixed with fear, the kind that roots you in place. This was my childhood home, after all. But so many memories, many of them fragmented, resurfaced, and most were memories I had spent years trying to bury. I pulled myself together and decided to take a closer look. The front door creaked as I pushed it open, and the stale air greeted me like an old, unwelcome friend. The inside was dim, filled with long shadows cast by the moonlight streaming through broken windows. Dust floated in the air, giving the room an eerie stillness. The silence was suffocating, the kind that felt almost alive, wrapping around me like a cold, damp blanket. As I stepped into the living room, memories rushed back, a mix of laughter and whispers, family gatherings, and strange silences. The old furniture was still there, covered in sheets, frozen in time like the remnants of another life. I moved further inside, my footsteps echoing eerily in the emptiness. Then, something caught my eye. On a table in the corner of the room, covered in dust, was an old photo album. It was my family's, unmistakably. I hadn't seen it in years, yet here it was, as if waiting for me. A chill crept down my spine as I opened it, flipping through page after page of memories that felt both familiar and unsettling. And then, on one of the last pages, I saw it, a photo I didn't recognize. It was a picture of me, much younger, standing in front of the house, but there was something off. Beside me stood a shadowy figure, its features blurred, like it wasn't meant to be there. My chest tightened. I closed the album, feeling a strange mix of fear and confusion. Who was in that photo? And why did I have no memory of it? I was jolted out of my thoughts by the sound of creaking footsteps from the floor above. My heart skipped a beat. I stood frozen, straining to hear as the creaking continued above me. Each step was slow, deliberate, as if someone, or something, was carefully moving through the upstairs rooms. It was impossible to ignore the gut-wrenching feeling that I was no longer alone in the house. Every instinct told me to leave, but something stronger, a sense of duty, curiosity, maybe even fear, kept me rooted in place. Taking a deep breath, I climbed the stairs, each creak of the wood sending a chill through me. The air grew colder with each step, and the narrow hallway at the top of the staircase felt like it hadn't seen light in years. Shadows clung to the walls, distorting familiar shapes into something unfamiliar, as though they were concealing secrets of their own. My old room was at the end of the hallway, the door slightly ajar, just as I had left it when we moved away. A faint memory surfaced of a child's voice calling to me late at night from that very room. Back then, I convinced myself it was only my imagination. But as I pushed the door open, it felt like that same voice whispered faintly in the dark, urging me inside. The room was just as I remembered it. The small bed with its faded blue sheets, the bookshelf piled with old toys and books, and my childhood drawings still taped to the wall, yellowed with age. Yet, there was something different, something that didn't belong. On the bed, carefully arranged, was a collection of small objects I hadn't seen in years, a broken toy truck, an old photo of my parents, and, strangely, a key I didn't recognize. My hand shook as I picked up the key, feeling the cold metal against my skin. It was heavy, with strange symbols etched into it, symbols that didn't look familiar but carried an unsettling aura. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was meant for something important, but what? Suddenly, I heard a whisper, faint but unmistakable, coming from behind me. I turned quickly, scanning the shadows, my heart pounding, but there was no one there. Just the empty, silent room. I shook my head, trying to dismiss it as a trick of my mind. But deep down, I knew that something was wrong. This wasn't the place I remembered. It was as if the house itself had come alive, feeding off my fear, waiting to reveal something it had kept hidden all these years. I took a step back, desperate to leave, but just as I turned toward the door, a glint of something caught my eye on the floor. I leaned down, and there, hidden beneath a layer of dust, was a faint trail of scratches, like something had been dragged across the wooden boards. The scratches seemed to form a path, winding from the center of the room toward the far corner, where an old, worn-out rug lay. My heartbeat quickened as I knelt, brushing away dust to reveal the intricate patterns gouged into the wood, markings that looked deliberate, almost like someone had been trying to leave a message. An uneasy feeling crept over me, but curiosity pushed me forward. I pulled back the rug, and there, hidden beneath, was a small, square door set into the floor. I had no memory of this door being here, and yet, it seemed like it had always been a part of the room, quietly waiting to be found. The strange key in my hand seemed to hum with a purpose of its own, drawing me closer to the hidden hatch. Kneeling down, I fit the key into the lock, which clicked with an unsettling ease, as though it had been waiting years for this very moment. The door creaked open, revealing a set of narrow stairs descending into the darkness below. A wave of stale, cold air drifted up, carrying a faint metallic scent that made my stomach twist. I hesitated, my grip tightening on the edges of the hatch. I wasn't sure if I was ready for whatever lay below, but something told me I had come too far to turn back now. Gripping my phone as a makeshift flashlight, I descended into the unknown. The stairs were steep, worn smooth by years of use, and the walls were lined with strange symbols, similar to those on the key. I couldn't shake the feeling that these symbols were watching me, whispering secrets that I couldn't understand. At the bottom, I found myself in a small, dimly lit chamber. The stone walls were damp, glistening in the faint light, and the floor was covered in a thick layer of dust, as though no one had been here for years. In the center of the room stood a simple wooden table, and on it, a collection of old, yellowed papers, scattered as if someone had left in a hurry. I picked up one of the papers, squinting to make out the faded handwriting. It was a journal entry, dated over 50 years ago, written in a familiar hand. My grandfather's handwriting. The words were barely legible, scrawled in a hurried, desperate script. They're watching. I've seen them in the shadows, felt their eyes on me. They know what we've done, and they won't rest until they've taken back what's theirs. I tried to hide it, to bury the past, but the curse lives on. We are bound to them now, forever. The words sent a chill through me. A curse? What could he have been talking about? I remembered my grandfather as a quiet, gentle man, not someone who would have involved himself in something so dark. Yet here was his handwriting, his words, warning of something that seemed beyond comprehension. The words on the page pulsed in my mind, and the reality of my surroundings closed in around me. I felt like I was intruding on something ancient and forbidden, a family secret buried so deeply that even memory had tried to erase it. My hand shook as I read further down the page. They came for me first in dreams, shadowed figures with eyes that gleamed in the dark. At first, I dismissed it as just nightmares. But they began leaving signs. I would wake to find strange symbols drawn on the floor, whispers lingering in the air even after I was alone. I glanced around the chamber, dread settling like a weight in my chest. I thought about the scratches on the floor above and the strange symbols carved into the walls. Could they be connected to whatever haunted my grandfather all those years ago? I turned to the next page, my fingers smudging the fragile paper. This entry was shorter, the handwriting even more erratic. I tried to protect my family, but they know. They know we are all bound to the past. There is no escape, not for me, not for them. It's only a matter of time before they come for us all. I sealed it away to protect them, but one day it will find its way back to us. We are tied by blood, by memory, by the sins we tried to bury. The words blurred as a sudden dizziness washed over me, and a realization struck me with terrifying clarity. My grandfather had known something, a secret tied to our family's history, hidden away, left to fester in this dark, silent chamber. A memory surfaced, one I hadn't thought of in years, my mother's quiet warnings to never venture into the basement, the way her face would tighten with fear if I even mentioned it. And now, here I was, at the heart of whatever horror he had tried to protect us from. A faint shuffling sound echoed from somewhere beyond the chamber walls, snapping me back to the present. My heart raced as I swung my phone's light toward the source, illuminating a dark corridor leading even deeper into the earth. Shadows danced across the walls, twisting into shapes that almost seemed to reach out, pulling me further down the path my family had tried to keep hidden. As I took a hesitant step forward, I noticed a small object lying on the floor by the entrance to the corridor, a worn leather-bound book, much older than my grandfather's journal. It looked like it had been placed there deliberately, waiting for someone to find it. I picked it up, running my fingers over the embossed cover. No title, no markings, just a simple clasp holding it shut. I unclasped it and opened to the first page. There, scrawled in the same strange symbols that lined the walls, was a phrase that seemed to throb with a sinister energy. Blood binds, memory calls, and the past cannot be forgotten. The words pulsed, twisting in my mind as if they were alive. Just then, a voice, barely a whisper but unmistakably real, echoed from the corridor. It called my name, soft and insistent, sending a shiver down my spine. The voice calling my name lingered in the cold air, wrapping around me with a chilling familiarity. It sounded like a whisper I'd heard before, soft, beckoning, and somehow intimately close. I shone my light down the corridor, the darkness seeming to absorb the beam, swallowing it whole. My pulse raced, but something in me compelled me to move forward, as if the echo of my name had unlocked a hidden door in my memory. The corridor walls were close, made of ancient stone, cold and damp to the touch. Every few steps, I catch glimpses of faint symbols carved into the walls, their edges worn smooth by time. They seemed to throb and shift in the dim light, forming patterns that felt oddly familiar, almost like fragments of a half-remembered dream. A part of me wanted to turn back, but the whispering voice grew stronger with each step, guiding me further down the narrow passage. Finally, the corridor opened into a larger chamber, where my footsteps echoed ominously against the stone floor. In the center of the room stood an altar, a crude, uneven slab of rock, with deep grooves that had once held something, perhaps candles or offerings. Surrounding it were more of those symbols, arranged in spirals, their meaning lost to time but their intent almost palpable. The air here felt heavy, thick with an ancient dread. And then I saw it, an old, tattered family portrait hanging above the altar, one I'd never seen before. It was unmistakably my family, my parents, my grandfather, and me. But this wasn't an ordinary photo. The faces were familiar, yet there was something off about each one. Their expressions were blank, eyes hollow and empty, as if they were mere shadows of the people I had known. My own face in the portrait seemed to be staring directly at me, a faint smirk curving at the edges of its mouth, as if it knew something I didn't. The unsettling realization crept over me. This wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a warning, a message left for me by those who had once been closest to me. As I reached out to touch the portrait, a sharp, sudden pain shot through my head, and memories I'd long forgotten flooded back with relentless intensity. I saw flashes of my childhood, strange moments I had dismissed as nightmares. I remembered waking up in the middle of the night, feeling a presence looming over me. The shape, the eyes, the whispers, they were all here, intertwined with this place, this hidden chamber where secrets had been buried. My hand dropped from the portrait, and I stumbled back, heart pounding as the whispers grew louder, forming words now. Words that filled me with a dreadful clarity. We are bound. You cannot leave. The voice was no longer a whisper, it was an urgent command, an echo of countless voices layered over one another, calling from the depths of time. I staggered back, gripping the cold stone wall as the chorus of voices continued, filling the chamber with a relentless hum that grew sharper, more distinct with every passing second. Each voice carried a different tone, some pleading, others accusing, all bound together by a common agony. It felt as though the walls themselves were alive, breathing with the weight of these trapped souls, their grief woven into the very foundation of the house. Desperation clawed at me, but I couldn't turn away from the portrait. My gaze was drawn to it, my eyes staring back at me from that smirking face. I leaned in, trying to make sense of it, and noticed something disturbing. The background of the portrait wasn't the home I remembered, it was this chamber. The altar, the symbols, everything was in the painting, as if it had been here since the moment that photograph was taken. I turned to look at the altar, and there, beneath a thick layer of dust, lay a small silver locket. Picking it up, I felt an odd familiarity, like a memory just out of reach. I brushed the dust away and opened it, revealing a tiny, faded picture inside. My grandmother's face stared back at me. She had passed away when I was very young, her memory obscured by time and the whispers of a family that rarely mentioned her. Yet, looking at her now, I felt a flicker of recognition. But something wasn't right. Her expression wasn't warm or gentle. Her face was lined with fear, her eyes wide, almost pleading. My breath caught as I felt a connection forming between us, a silent, terrifying understanding. It was as if her spirit was here, trapped just like the others, bound to this place by something dark and inescapable. My hands shook as I closed the locket, the silver cold against my skin. The voices around me grew quieter, as if watching, waiting. A faint scuffling sound echoed from the corridor behind me, followed by the creak of the floor above. I whipped around, straining to see, but there was nothing, only the relentless shadows clinging to the walls. Then, out of the silence, a voice, a single, clear voice, broke through the murmur of whispers. It was a woman's voice, soft yet commanding, filled with a sorrow that made my chest ache. "Daniel," she whispered, "you must understand. You're the only one who can break it. You're the last of us. Only you can put an end to the curse that binds us here." I swallowed, my throat dry, feeling the weight of her words pressing down on me. Break the curse? My mind raced, trying to understand what she meant, but there were no answers here, only layers of questions, veiled in shadows. The voice lingered in the stillness, its sorrow weaving through the darkness. I clutched the locket tightly, feeling the cold metal press into my palm. My heart hammered as I processed her words. I was the last of us, and the responsibility of ending whatever bound my family here now rested on me. I took a steadying breath, my thoughts racing. Could I really end something that had haunted my family for generations? What was this curse, and why had my family's past been buried so deeply, hidden from all of us? The silence hung heavy as if waiting for me to move, to act. The locket seemed to vibrate gently in my hand, as though urging me towards something unknown yet inevitable. Turning back to the altar, I noticed an object I hadn't seen before, a journal, bound in worn leather, partially hidden beneath a loose stone. I tugged it free, dust falling in soft clouds as I opened it. The handwriting inside was familiar, matching the frantic scrawl I'd seen in my grandfather's journal upstairs, but this time the tone was different. The words were deliberate, methodical, as if he had come to a resolution. "I have tried everything," the entry read, "from rituals and prayers to isolation, but nothing has severed our family's bond to this place. The curse is too deeply woven into our bloodline. Only a willing sacrifice can break it, but it demands more than I could ever give. The shadows have made their terms clear, one of us must stay." The meaning of his words hit me like a cold shock. My grandfather had been willing to sacrifice himself, but something had stopped him. Perhaps it was fear, perhaps the realization that even his life wasn't enough to satisfy whatever haunted our family. A knot formed in my stomach as I began to piece it together. This curse, whatever it was, thrived on our family's blood, binding each generation here, feeding our memories, our fears. A faint sound, almost like a sigh, echoed through the chamber. I spun around, searching the darkness, but there was no one there, only shadows shifting, breathing, almost alive. As I looked closer, shapes began to take form within the shadows, faces twisted with grief, familiar eyes watching me, expressions both pleading and resigned. These were my ancestors, bound to this place, unable to leave. I felt a surge of anger and sorrow, a need to free them from whatever twisted fate had anchored them here. Turning back to the journal, I found a final entry, scrawled in shaky, desperate handwriting. "Daniel, if you're reading this, please, end it. Don't let them take another. The answer is in the blood. Only through the blood can we be freed." A sharp, cold chill ran through me as the realization dawned. The locket in my hand, the shadows reaching out, the portrait on the wall, all of it pointed to one truth. I was not just here to uncover the past. I was here to offer myself to it, the last in a line of sacrifices that had failed, a legacy of binding and release only I could fulfill. The weight of the revelation pressed down on me, leaving me breathless in the silent chamber. I ran my fingers over the cover of the journal, feeling its rough leather, each worn edge a reminder of the hands that had gripped it before me. This wasn't just a family curse, it was a dark pact, a web of choices and sacrifices, all ending with me. I was the last in line. The shadows seemed to shift closer, crowding the edges of my vision as if waiting for my decision. I clutched the locket, a cold resolve settling over me. My family had spent generations trying to hide, to run, but perhaps the only way to break this was to face it head on. There had to be something I could do, some way to untangle the binding that kept these spirits tethered here. I stepped forward, closer to the altar, the dust swirling around my feet. As I did, a faint glimmer caught my eye, a small, rusty blade lying on the altar's surface, half hidden by shadows. It looked ancient, with strange symbols etched into the metal, the same symbols that lined the walls and decorated the journal's pages. The blade felt like an extension of the curse itself, a silent witness to the countless lives it had touched. My hand shook as I reached for it, feeling the weight of generations in that single touch. The moment my fingers wrapped around the hilt, a rush of images flooded my mind, faces, voices, memories that weren't my own but belonged to my ancestors. I saw glimpses of them standing in this very spot, the same fear and uncertainty etched across their faces. Each one had held this blade, had been given the same choice. And each one had failed. The visions faded, leaving a hollow ache in my chest. I was the last chance to end it, the final piece in a ritual that had haunted my family for too long. But what did it mean to give my blood? The phrase echoed in my mind, an unsettling refrain. I glanced down at the locket in my hand, the picture of my grandmother still staring up at me, her eyes filled with silent pleas. Setting the locket carefully on the altar, I lifted the blade, my heart pounding with a grim determination. If it was blood that the curse demanded, I would give it, on my terms. I made a small cut on my palm, wincing as the blade sliced through skin, warm blood trickling down onto the altar. The stone seemed to absorb it, darkening as if thirsty for the offering. The shadows around me stilled, their restless energy growing tense, expectant. Then, a sudden pain surged through my hand, and I gasped, doubling over as the room spun around me. My vision blurred, and I felt as though I was sinking into the floor itself, my senses overwhelmed by a darkness that was both suffocating and endless. The voices returned, louder now, swirling around me in a chaotic storm. We are bound. You are the last. Release us. Their pleas twisted in my mind, a cacophony of voices, desperate and unrelenting. I understood now. They weren't here to haunt me. They were trapped, bound to this curse just as I was, waiting for someone to release them. As the pain intensified, I clutched the altar, my blood smearing across the stone. The shadows seemed to move toward me, reaching out, hands made of darkness brushing against my skin. My ancestors, these lost souls, were not here to harm me, they were reaching for freedom. And it was up to me to give it to them. The shadows gathered closer, their forms coalescing into translucent faces, faces of my ancestors, contorted with sorrow and longing. I could see them clearly now, their eyes hollow with centuries of suffering, pleading for release. My heartbeat thundered as I realized the weight of their presence, the depth of the pain that held them here. They were my family, each soul bound by blood to this curse, waiting for one final act to free them. My hand throbbed where I cut it, a thin line of blood trickling down my wrist. The altar absorbed each drop, the stone seemingly alive, as though drawing energy from my very essence. It was as if my sacrifice had awakened something ancient and powerful, stirring in response to my offering. I heard the soft voice of my grandmother again, her words curling around me like tendrils of smoke. Daniel, the curse began with our blood. It must end with it. Her voice was gentle, yet it held a resolve that sent chills down my spine. My fingers tightened around the blade. Could I truly be the one to end this? I leaned in closer to the altar, letting my blood drip steadily onto its surface. The walls seemed to pulse with a new life, symbols glowing faintly, as though they were feeding off my offering. My mind felt cloudy, a strange heaviness settling over me, yet I sensed that I was moving closer to something, some ultimate truth that my ancestors had kept hidden, buried deep within our family's past. Then, through the haze, I saw her, my grandmother's spirit, more defined now, her face drawn and weary. She extended a hand, motioning for me to come closer. Trembling, I reached out, my hand passing through hers, cold and ethereal, but somehow grounding me in the moment. You are not alone, Daniel. Each of us failed to break it, but you hold our final hope. You must confront the source. As she spoke, her form began to dissolve, merging back into the shadows, but not before her eyes locked with mine, conveying a mixture of strength and sorrow. My heart twisted with the realization that she, like the others, had been trapped here, waiting for someone to finish what they could not. This was a burden passed through generations, each one bearing the curse until they succumbed, unable to complete the ritual that would free them. The chamber began to tremble as though awakening from centuries of slumber. Stone dust fell from the ceiling, and the symbols on the walls glowed brighter, their light shifting, swirling around me. I could feel the shadows tugging at my mind, drawing me deeper into the truth of the curse. I closed my eyes, allowing myself to sink into the dark void that now pulsed through me. In an instant, I was transported to another memory, a vision of my grandfather, much younger, standing before the same altar, desperation etched into his face. He held the same blade, his hand bleeding as he too offered his blood to the curse. But something was different. His expression shifted to terror as a darkness overtook him, swirling shadows engulfing him, rejecting his offering. I stumbled back, the memory releasing me, gasping as the truth began to crystallize in my mind. My ancestors hadn't simply failed, the curse had resisted their attempts, feeding on their efforts, growing stronger with each generation. The blood alone wasn't enough. It demanded something more, something only I, as the last of my line, could offer. The altar pulsed with a dark energy, the air thickening as if alive with anticipation. I realized then that the curse wasn't merely bound to blood. It was tied to memory, to the collective suffering and secrets buried within our family. Only by facing the darkness, by uncovering every painful truth and secret it held, could I truly end it. Taking a steadying breath, I placed my bleeding hand over my heart, my voice barely a whisper. I am here. I accept what you demand. Reveal to me the truth, all of it. The chamber fell deathly silent, and the darkness seemed to ripple in response. My ancestors' voices rose again, weaving through my mind, their memories flooding into me, raw and unfiltered. Centuries of anguish, moments of fear, desperation, and regret washed over me, each one pulling me further into the core of the curse. My body shuddered as I absorbed their pain, feeling every wound, every broken promise, every shattered hope that had led us here. And then, in the center of it all, I found this source, a presence, ancient and relentless, a dark entity bound to our family, feeding on our blood and memories, growing stronger with each sacrifice. It waited, lurking in the depths, watching me with a hunger that chilled my soul. I could feel its eyes, piercing through the shadows, challenging me to finish what my ancestors could not. For the first time, I understood the full horror of what bound us here. And I realized that to end it, I would have to confront this entity directly, offering not just blood, but my very life, my essence. The weight of the entity loomed over me, an oppressive darkness that churned and writhed like a living thing, feeding off the collective grief and despair of my ancestors. It pulsed with an energy that felt both ancient and malicious, a shadowy mass that whispered promises of power, yet concealed a profound danger within its depths. Each heartbeat resonated with its presence, urging me to succumb to fear, to turn back. But I couldn't. Not now. Drawing on every ounce of courage I had, I stepped forward, the altar beneath me trembling as if acknowledging my resolve. I understood that confronting this entity meant acknowledging the darkness within my own family history, the choices that had led us to this moment. My blood had brought me here, and now it would have to serve a greater purpose. I needed to unravel the threads of our past to forge a new future. Show yourself. I called out, my voice echoing through the chamber, defiant against the consuming darkness. The shadows recoiled slightly, as if taken aback by my challenge. The air crackled with tension, and for a brief moment, I felt the weight of countless eyes watching me, the spirits of my ancestors lingering, waiting for my next move. The shadows thickened, swirling around me like a tempest. A deep, guttural laughter resonated from the heart of the darkness, filling the chamber with an unsettling sense of dread. I clenched my fists, determination burning within me. The time for fear had passed. I had to confront this entity, to peel back the layers of terror and uncover the truth hidden beneath its malevolent facade. Suddenly, the darkness shifted, coalescing into a form that flickered like a flame, a silhouette of a man, tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that glinted with malice. It was the manifestation of the curse itself, my family's tormentor, and I was now standing at its mercy. "Ah, the last of the bloodline," it hissed, the voice resonating like a dark melody. "You seek to break the chains that bind you? Foolish child. Your blood feeds me. You cannot escape your legacy." My heart raced, but I held my ground. "I won't let you control us any longer. You've thrived on our pain for too long. This ends now." With each defiant word, the shadows around me pulsed and writhed, angry at my resistance. The figure's laugh echoed, reverberating through the chamber as it stepped closer, reaching out with long, skeletal fingers that seemed to dissolve into the darkness itself. "You think your defiance will change anything? Your family has tried for generations, and they all fell before me. What makes you different?" The entity's voice dripped with contempt, the shadows swirling in a chaotic dance around us, thickening like a fog of despair. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, drawing strength from the locket still resting on the altar, its surface glimmering in the faint light. I am different because I choose to face the truth. I choose to confront the pain and secrets you've kept buried. As I spoke, I felt a surge of energy coursing through me, igniting my determination. I'm not afraid of my past. I will free my family from your grasp. With a primal scream, I plunged the blade deep into my palm once more, letting the blood flow freely. The altar pulsed violently in response, the symbols lighting up in a brilliant blaze as my blood mingled with the stone. The laughter of the entity faltered, confusion breaking through its confident facade. "Fool," it snarled, retreating slightly as my blood transformed into a radiant light. "You cannot hope to defeat me with mere offerings." But I had something it did not. With each drop that fell upon the altar, I summoned the memories of my ancestors, intertwining their pain and fear with my own resolve. I envisioned my grandmother, her face determined and brave, my grandfather, his spirit unbroken despite the darkness that had claimed him. Their courage flowed through me, igniting a fire that burned away the shadows. "Your power is rooted in our fear, our secrets," I shouted, feeling the energy of the altar surge. "But I will not hide. I will face the truth, and I will expose your lies." The darkness writhed, the figure contorting as if in pain. "No! You cannot do this." It lashed out, shadows forming tendrils that sought to ensnare me, but I stood firm, channeling the strength of my ancestors, pushing back against the encroaching darkness. In that moment, I realized that the entity thrived on our silence, on the secrets we had buried deep within our hearts. I called out the names of those who had suffered, invoking their memories, forcing the truth into the light. Let them speak. Let their voices be heard. With each name I uttered, the air shimmered with energy, resonating with the weight of their truths. The tendrils recoiled as if struck, and the figure before me twisted in agony. Its hollow eyes flickered with fear, the darkness around it dimming. You think you can unveil my power? I am eternal. I will consume your light, it roared, but my resolve only strengthened. No! I shouted back, my voice ringing with the echoes of my ancestors. You are nothing without our pain. You are nothing without our silence. With one final thrust of will, I thrust the blade into the altar once more, feeling a surge of energy unlike anything I had ever experienced. The chamber exploded in blinding light, the shadows recoiling as the truth poured forth, unearthing the buried memories and releasing the spirits of my family. The light surged around me, enveloping the entity, piercing through its dark form. Its shrieks filled the chamber, a cacophony of rage and despair. No! This cannot be. As the light consumed it, I felt the weight of my ancestors lifting, their sorrow dissipating like mist in the dawn. Their faces emerged, illuminated and free, their smiles radiant as they turned to me, gratitude shining in their eyes. And then, with a final, deafening roar, the entity was gone, consumed by the very truth it had sought to suppress. The darkness that had held my family captive for generations began to dissolve, replaced by a warm, golden light that filled the chamber, illuminating the walls, the altar, and the very air around me. I collapsed to my knees, breathless and trembling, my heart pounding with a mixture of relief and disbelief. The chamber was transformed, no longer a tomb of secrets, but a sanctuary of freedom. I could still feel the energy of my ancestors surrounding me, their love wrapping around me like a warm embrace. The curse was broken. I had faced the darkness and emerged victorious, but the cost weighed heavy on my heart. As I looked up, the shimmering light began to fade, but the warmth remained, a testament to the truth that had finally set my family free. The chamber settled into a serene silence, the echoes of the past now transformed into a gentle hum of gratitude. I knelt on the altar, the once ominous symbols now glowing softly, a reminder of the darkness that had been banished. My hand throbbed, the cut from the blade still fresh, but it was a pain I welcomed, a tangible connection to the struggle that had unfolded. I was still alive, still breathing, and I had freed my family from the suffocating grip of the curse. As the last remnants of the entity dissipated, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The atmosphere around me shifted, the air was lighter, infused with warmth and hope. I blinked, trying to adjust to the change, and looked around the chamber that had once felt so menacing. Sunlight filtered through cracks in the stone, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air, giving the space an ethereal glow. Standing up, I took a deep breath, inhaling the fresh air that now filled the room. It was as if the very walls were breathing again, exhaling the horrors they had contained for so long. I stepped back from the altar, my eyes scanning the space that had witnessed so much suffering. The shadows that had once clung to every corner were now nothing more than gentle reminders of the history that had unfolded here. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, a flicker of light that danced along the walls. My heart raced as I approached, half expecting to see the lingering specters of my ancestors. Instead, the light converged into a figure, a woman, radiant and ethereal, her presence calming yet powerful. "Daniel," she spoke, her voice like a soft breeze, echoing through the chamber. You have done what many could not. You have faced the darkness and emerged victorious. My breath caught in my throat as recognition washed over me. It was my grandmother, her spirit finally free from the chains of the past. Her hair flowed like silver threads, glimmering in the newfound light, and her eyes shone with pride. I didn't think I'd see you like this, I stammered, tears prickling at the corners of my eyes. I thought I'd lost you forever. You never lost me, my dear. I was always with you, watching over you, guiding you from the shadows, she replied, her smile warm and reassuring. Now, you have given me, and our family, what we longed for, freedom. The words hung in the air, filled with meaning. A rush of emotions flooded through me, relief, love, and an overwhelming sense of belonging. I had not only confronted the darkness of the curse, but had also brought my family back into the light, reconnecting us in ways I could never have imagined. But how? I asked, still grappling with the enormity of what I had done. How can I ensure that this curse never returns? She stepped closer, her figure glowing brighter. By honoring our memories and sharing our truth. Your journey has just begun. You are the bearer of our stories now. The light you have awakened must be shared with others to break the cycle of fear and silence that has plagued our family for generations. I nodded, absorbing her words. I felt the responsibility settle over me like a mantle, heavy yet empowering. I promised to tell our story, to ensure that no one forgets what we endured. No more shadows, no more secrets. She reached out, placing her hand over my heart. Remember, Daniel, it's not just about the blood that binds us, it's the love and courage that will carry our legacy forward. You have the strength to face whatever comes next. As her hand lingered, I felt a surge of warmth spreading through me, a connection that transcended time and space. It was as if she was infusing me with her strength, her wisdom, and the collective courage of our family. I could feel the shadows of doubt and fear dissipating, replaced by a fierce determination to honor their memory. Thank you, Grandma, I whispered, emotion choking my voice. I won't let you down. With that, her figure began to fade, the light surrounding her softening until only a shimmering glow remained. Live well, my dear. Embrace your life, and know that we are always with you. As the last of her essence melted into the air, I stood alone in the chamber, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace wash over me. The weight of the past had transformed into a guiding light, illuminating the path ahead. I took one last look at the altar, the symbols now radiant with promise rather than despair. It was time to leave this place behind and carry our truth into the world. But as I stepped toward the exit, a sudden rustling sound drew my attention. The door, which had felt so heavy before, now creaked open slowly, revealing a narrow passageway leading to the outside world. I hesitated for a moment, the familiar sense of trepidation creeping back. But as I stepped into the light, I felt the warmth envelop me, a sign that I was on the right path. The sunlight streamed down, illuminating the remnants of the dark, forgotten structure behind me. The old stones, once a prison of shadows, now glimmered with newfound hope. The world beyond awaited me, filled with possibilities, but I knew I would carry the memories of my family with me, their love, their pain, and their strength. The curse had been broken, and I was ready to share our truth with anyone willing to listen. As I emerged from the shadows into the vibrant world outside, I felt a profound sense of purpose. I would not just survive, I would thrive. With each step forward, I vowed to reclaim my family's legacy, to tell our story, and to ensure that the darkness we had faced would never again take root in the hearts of those we loved. The sun bathed the landscape in golden light, casting away the lingering shadows of the past. As I stepped onto the familiar path that led back to town, I took a moment to breathe in the fresh air, filled with the scent of blooming flowers and the distant sound of laughter. Everything felt different, yet achingly familiar, like a memory slowly being reclaimed. With each step, the burdens of my past lifted. I could feel the whispers of my ancestors and the gentle rustle of the leaves, their laughter mingling with the wind. It was as if they were encouraging me, reminding me of the strength that flowed through my veins. I was not alone. I was a continuation of their stories, and now it was my turn to weave them into the tapestry of life. As I entered the town, I noticed subtle changes, a sense of lightness in the air, the faces of the townsfolk more vibrant and animated. The shadows that once lingered seemed to have lifted, and I wondered if the energy that had surrounded me in the chamber had permeated the entire community. Perhaps the darkness that had taken root in my family had also affected those around us. I walked towards the cafe where my childhood friends often gathered, the smell of fresh coffee mingling with the sound of cheerful chatter. It was a small place, filled with memories of laughter and late-night talks. I pushed the door open, the familiar chime announcing my arrival. The chatter stilled momentarily as heads turned and eyes widened in surprise. They hadn't seen me in years, and I suddenly felt exposed, as if the weight of my experiences was written across my face. But instead of fear, I felt a swell of courage. I had faced darkness and emerged into the light. Now, it was time to share my journey. Daniel. Sarah, my childhood friend, rushed towards me, her arms open wide. I embraced her, feeling her warmth envelop me. We thought we'd lost you. Where have you been? I had to confront some things back home, I replied, my voice steady. But I'm here now. I'm ready to talk. The cafe buzzed with energy again, and as I took my seat at a table, I felt the tension in the air lift. My friends leaned in, curiosity etched on their faces. What do you mean? What happened? One of them asked. Taking a deep breath, I began to recount my story, weaving in the tales of my ancestors, the darkness we had faced, and the ultimate victory over the curse. As I spoke, I saw the expressions of disbelief and horror transform into understanding and empathy. They listened, rapt, as I shared the burden of silence that had plagued my family, how it had festered and grown until it almost consumed us. I talked about the journey to the chamber, the confrontation with the entity, and how love and truth had triumphed over fear. Each word felt like a catharsis, releasing the pain that had once held me captive. And as I shared the stories of my ancestors, their spirits seemed to join us in the cafe, their presence palpable in the warmth of the room. When I finished, a hush fell over the group. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Sarah reached across the table, her eyes glistening with tears. I had no idea, Daniel. I'm so proud of you. You're so brave. One by one, my friends began to share their own stories, struggles with family, fears they had kept hidden, and the burdens they had carried alone. It was a moment of profound connection, where our vulnerabilities became our strengths, uniting us in a tapestry of shared experiences. As the conversation flowed, I felt the healing power of our words. In that small cafe, we forged a bond, transforming our fears into hope and our silence into stories. It was a celebration of life, a tribute to those who had suffered in silence, and a promise that we would no longer let fear dictate our narratives. When the sun began to set, casting a golden hue across the cafe, I realized that this was just the beginning. The darkness that had once threatened to consume my family was now a part of our history, but it no longer held power over us. I could sense the spirits of my ancestors watching, their expressions proud as they lingered in the corners of my mind. They had entrusted me with their stories, and I would honor them by continuing to share our truth, ensuring that no one else would have to suffer in silence. The cafe buzzed with laughter and warmth, a stark contrast to the cold shadows that had once haunted our lives. In that moment, I understood that I was not just carrying the weight of my family's past, I was also the bearer of hope for the future. As we left the cafe, stepping out into the cool evening air, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. The world was bright with possibilities, and I was ready to embrace them all, empowered by the truth and love that flowed through me. I would tell our story to anyone willing to listen, a beacon of light against the darkness that threatened to return. And as I walked through the familiar streets, I knew that the journey ahead would not be without challenges, but I was no longer afraid. The past had shaped me, but it would not define me. I would honor my ancestors, carry their legacy forward, and ensure that their stories lived on, intertwining with my own as we ventured into the dawn of a new chapter. The weeks turned into months, and the warmth of newfound connections blossomed within me. I became a storyteller, sharing my family's journey with anyone who would listen. In every gathering, I would recount the tales of my ancestors, their struggles, their victories, and the resilience that defined us. Each story was a thread in the tapestry of our legacy, weaving us closer together, uniting the community in shared understanding and empathy. I found solace in the connections I forged, but there were whispers of unease that began to ripple through town. Some townsfolk, those who had long ignored the past, now seemed restless, their discomfort with my revelations evident. They turned their backs while I spoke of the darkness that had lingered, the secrets that had festered in the shadows. It was during a local fair, a vibrant celebration of our town's history, that the tension reached its peak. Stalls adorned with colorful decorations lined the streets, laughter and music filling the air. I set up a booth to share my family's story, hopeful that the community would embrace the truth as I had. As I stood beneath the swaying banners, I felt a sense of purpose. This was a chance to break the cycle of fear and silence. But as people passed, I noticed a group lingering nearby, whispering amongst themselves, their faces etched with skepticism. "Look at him, trying to play the hero," one woman sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "As if he can change what's already been done." I tried to brush off the comment, but it gnawed at me, a reminder that not everyone was ready to confront the past. Still, I continued to share my story, recounting the darkness that had haunted my family and the victory that had come with embracing the truth. But with every tale shared, I felt an undercurrent of tension rise, a storm brewing just beneath the surface. The whispers grew louder, and I began to sense a division within the town, a divide between those willing to confront their history and those who preferred to keep it buried. As the sun began to set, casting an orange glow over the fair, I looked out at the crowd, their faces illuminated by the fading light. I could see a mixture of emotions, curiosity, fear, anger. The energy shifted, and I knew I had to confront the growing discontent head-on. Stepping up onto a small stage, I called for silence, my heart pounding in my chest. "I know some of you are uncomfortable with the stories I've shared," I began, my voice steady yet passionate. "But it is time we acknowledge our past. It is time we face the truths that have haunted our families for generations." A murmur rippled through the crowd, a mix of agreement and dissent. "Why should we dwell on the past?" one man shouted. "What good does it do?" "It does good because silence only allows the darkness to thrive." I countered, my conviction strengthening. By sharing our stories, we empower ourselves and each other. We can break the cycle of pain and fear. The crowd shifted, some nodding in agreement, while others remained skeptical. It was a fragile moment, and I could feel the weight of their emotions pressing down on me. But I couldn't back down. This was my truth, our truth, and it deserved to be heard. Then, amidst the crowd, I spotted a familiar face, Mr. Henderson, an elderly man who had once been a pillar of our community. He stepped forward, his voice trembling yet strong. "Daniel speaks the truth. I've carried my own secrets for far too long. It's time we stopped hiding." His admission broke the tension, and I felt a wave of relief wash over me. One by one, others began to step forward, sharing their own stories of pain and loss, of families torn apart by silence and shame. Each voice added to the chorus of truth, and the energy shifted, transforming the atmosphere from one of fear to empowerment. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the fair in twilight, I felt the power of connection surging through us. The shadows that had lingered began to fade, replaced by a sense of unity and purpose. Together, we were weaving a new narrative, one that acknowledged our shared history while embracing the promise of healing. But as the last light of day slipped away, a chilling breeze swept through the fairgrounds, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. I glanced towards the shadows, where I could see silhouettes watching from the edge of the festivities. A sense of dread crept in, and I couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness we had banished was not finished with us yet. Unbeknownst to me, the echoes of the past were still lurking, waiting to resurface. I could sense a storm brewing, and I knew that the battle against the darkness was far from over. My journey had led me to this moment, but it felt like a mere prelude to something much greater, something that would force me to confront the very foundation of my family's history once more. And as the stars began to twinkle above, I steeled myself for whatever was to come. The fight for truth and healing had only just begun, and I was determined to see it through, no matter the cost. The night deepened, the festivities around me continuing to swirl with laughter and chatter. Yet, beneath the surface, I felt an unsettling tension, like a taut string ready to snap. The voices of my community echoed with stories of pain and resilience, but the shadows at the edges of the fairgrounds seemed to loom closer, their presence a stark reminder that not everyone was ready to confront the truth. As more townsfolk stepped forward, sharing their stories, I felt a powerful shift in the air. With each revelation, a collective weight lifted, unburdening souls that had long been shackled by fear. Yet, my gaze kept drifting to the darker corners of the fair, where the flickering lights struggled to pierce the gloom. A sense of unease settled over me, an instinctive awareness that the confrontation I had hoped for was merely the prelude to something more sinister. "Let's keep this momentum going," I encouraged the crowd, my heart racing with determination. Together, we can reclaim our narrative and ensure that the past no longer has power over us. The response was electric, a wave of energy surging through the crowd as they began to cheer. The realization of our shared struggle had ignited a spark, a fervor for change that resonated within the hearts of many. But as the cheers echoed, I caught a glimpse of movement among the shadows, dark figures slipping away, their intentions hidden behind a veil of secrecy. I shook off the feeling, focusing on the faces around me, their expressions filled with hope, their spirits rising. Yet, I couldn't help but wonder about the figures in the darkness. Were they the remnants of the curse, seeking to reclaim what we had begun to dismantle? Or were they simply those who preferred the comfort of ignorance over the discomfort of truth? "Daniel." Sarah's voice broke through my thoughts, pulling me back to the moment. "You've inspired so many tonight. We need to keep this going. Let's organize a gathering, a space where everyone can come and share their stories." Her enthusiasm was infectious, and I felt a surge of hope at the prospect. Yes, we can create a community forum, a place where we can all come together and support one another. Just then, a loud crash interrupted our conversation, the sound echoing through the fairgrounds like a gunshot. The crowd fell silent, heads turning towards the source of the commotion. I felt a chill run down my spine as I moved closer, my heart pounding in my chest. "Over there," someone shouted, pointing towards a toppled stall. The colorful banners lay strewn across the ground, the contents scattered. My instincts kicked in, and I rushed towards the chaos, adrenaline flooding my system. As I approached, I spotted a figure darting away, cloaked in shadows. "Stop!" I shouted, but the figure was quick, disappearing into the darkness beyond the fairgrounds. I paused, torn between pursuing the unknown and tending to the aftermath of the chaos. I could see townsfolk rushing to help, but the feeling of urgency pushed me forward. "What was that?" A voice trembled from behind me. I turned to see Mr. Henderson, his face pale. "Is this connected to the stories you've been sharing?" "I don't know," I admitted, my heart racing. "But we need to find out." I glanced back at the scattered stall, noticing a broken mirror lying among the debris. It shimmered eerily in the dim light, reflecting distorted images of the fair, a fractured glimpse into our reality. Without thinking, I picked it up, feeling an odd pull towards it. The mirror's surface was cold against my skin, and for a brief moment, I saw flickers of familiar faces, my ancestors, their expressions twisted in fear and sorrow. I shuddered, the weight of their memories pressing down on me. "Daniel!" Sarah called out again, urgency lacing her voice. "What are you doing?" "We need to help." I hesitated, the mirror still gripped in my hand. I feel like there's something more to this. Something we haven't uncovered yet. "Whatever it is, we can face it together," she urged, her eyes steady and reassuring. "Let's regroup and figure out what just happened." Reluctantly, I nodded, tucking the mirror beneath my arm. Together, we returned to the heart of the fair, where the atmosphere had shifted again, anxiety rippling through the crowd. People gathered, whispering among themselves, glancing towards the shadows with trepidation. As I took the stage once more, I could see the fear in their eyes. "I know tonight has been unsettling, but we must not let fear divide us," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "We are stronger together. We've faced darkness before, and we can do it again." The crowd listened, their expressions shifting from fear to resolve. One by one, familiar faces began to speak, sharing their own encounters with the unknown, strange noises at night, glimpses of figures in the woods, and shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. The energy in the air shifted, transforming anxiety into determination. But amid the rising tension, a cold wind swept through the fairgrounds, carrying with it a sense of foreboding. I glanced towards the edges of the festival, where shadows danced ominously in the moonlight. The darkness felt almost alive, a force waiting to strike. Suddenly, a loud voice pierced the night, booming across the crowd. "Enough of this nonsense." A man stepped forward, his face familiar but twisted with anger. It was Thomas, a once respected member of our community, now consumed by a desperate need to cling to the past. "You think sharing stories will save you? You're only inviting trouble." "Thomas, this is our moment," I retorted, my heart racing. "We need to face our history together." He scoffed, shaking his head vehemently. "Your history is a curse, Daniel. You're dragging us all back into the darkness." The crowd murmured, caught in the clash of ideals. I could see fear creeping back into their eyes, threatening to unravel the unity we had built. "No!" I shouted, my voice cutting through the tension. "Our stories are not a curse, they're our strength. Together, we can break the chains that bind us." But Thomas stepped closer, his eyes glinting with fervor. "You're a fool if you think the darkness will just disappear. It's part of our town, it's in our bones. You're only awakening what should stay buried." At his words, a chill settled over me, a deep-rooted fear creeping back. I realized that Thomas was not just speaking for himself, he was voicing the fears of many who still clung to the past, who believed that confronting the truth would only open the floodgates of horror. As I faced him, I felt the weight of the mirror pressing against my side, a reminder of what I had seen, the truth I had glimpsed. "Thomas, the darkness only holds power over us if we allow it," I urged, desperation rising in my voice. "We can choose to let go of fear." But before he could respond, a deep rumble echoed through the fairgrounds, the ground shaking beneath our feet. Gasps erupted from the crowd, eyes wide with panic. The atmosphere shifted dramatically, and the shadows at the edges seemed to come alive, writhing as if seeking a way into the light. "Run!" someone screamed, and chaos erupted as people scrambled to escape the unfolding horror. "Stay together!" I shouted, but the crowd was already dispersing, the night filled with screams and confusion. I could see the shadows moving closer, the figures I had glimpsed earlier emerging from the darkness, their intentions unclear but menacing. In the midst of the chaos, I caught a glimpse of Thomas, his expression twisted in fear and anger as he struggled to make sense of the unfolding nightmare. "You brought this upon us, Daniel," he shouted over the din, his voice lost in the panic. "No!" I yelled back, my heart racing as I tried to stay grounded in the turmoil. "We can't let fear dictate our actions." But as I moved to rally the remaining townsfolk, the shadows surged forward, coalescing into forms that were both familiar and terrifying. The figures of my ancestors materialized, their expressions a mixture of sorrow and rage, caught in a struggle between the past and the present. The mirror clutched tightly and my hand began to glow, a soft light radiating from its surface. I knew then that this was the key, a connection to the truth that had been lost, a bridge between the past and the future. I stepped forward, holding it aloft, calling out to the spirits that surrounded us. "Listen to me. We honor you by facing our fears, by sharing our truth." I shouted, the energy around me pulsating with the weight of my words. "Together, we can find peace." The shadows hesitated, the figures flickering in and out of existence as they hovered between worlds. I could see their eyes searching, pleading for recognition, for understanding. It was a moment of vulnerability, a connection that transcended time. And then, as if drawn by an invisible thread, the figures began to move closer, their energy intertwining with the light from the mirror. I felt the power of my ancestors surge through me, their strength and wisdom filling the space around us. "Let them know they are not alone," I whispered, my voice breaking with emotion. "Let them know they are loved." As the words left my lips, the mirror pulsed with light, illuminating the darkness that had threatened to consume us. The shadows began to recede, their malevolence dissipating in the face of the truth we had embraced. But just as I felt a sense of triumph wash over me, a piercing scream shattered the moment, a cry of despair that echoed through the night. My heart sank as I turned to see Sarah, her face contorted in terror as she pointed toward the forest beyond the fairgrounds. "They're coming," she gasped, her eyes wide with fear. "We need to get out of here." The shadows surged back, their forms shifting and twisting, a chaotic tempest of darkness intent on reclaiming what we had sought to dispel. The atmosphere crackled with tension, and I knew in that moment that the battle was far from over. With the light of the mirror guiding us, I felt the spirits of my ancestors rallying, their presence bolstering my resolve. "We fight together," I shouted, my voice rising above the chaos. "We will not let the darkness claim us again." As I stepped forward, the crowd began to respond, their fear transforming into defiance. We were not just a gathering of individuals, we were a community, bound by our stories and our shared determination to confront the shadows of our past. But as we stood together, ready to face the darkness, I knew that this moment was just the beginning of a much larger battle, a struggle not only against the shadows that haunted us, but also against the fears that threatened to tear us apart. The echoes of the past were rising, but we would stand firm, united in our quest for truth and healing. And as the figures surged towards us, the flickering light of the mirror illuminating our path, I felt an overwhelming sense of purpose. We would not be defeated. We would reclaim our narrative together, and in doing so, honor the spirits that had guided us to this moment. The shadows surged forward, a tide of darkness intent on reclaiming what we had begun to dismantle. The flickering light from the mirror bathed the fairgrounds in an ethereal glow, creating a fragile barrier between us and the encroaching horror. "Stand firm," I shouted, my voice carrying over the rising chaos. The townsfolk, their expressions a mix of fear and determination, gathered around me, forming a protective circle. The air was thick with tension, each heartbeat echoing in my ears. In that moment, I could feel the spirits of my ancestors rallying behind me, their energy intertwining with our own. It was as if they were saying, "You are not alone." I clutched the mirror tightly, its surface warm beneath my fingers, a tangible connection to the past that had shaped our present. As the dark figures advanced, I caught glimpses of their faces, lost souls caught between worlds, their expressions filled with sorrow and desperation. "You don't have to be afraid," I cried out to them, my heart racing. "We can find peace together." But the shadows only grew more agitated, swirling around us like a storm, their forms shifting and flickering. A deep rumble echoed through the night, shaking the ground beneath our feet, a reminder that the battle we faced was not just against the darkness outside, but also the fears and regrets that festered within us. "Daniel," Sarah's voice broke through my thoughts. "What do we do?" "Hold the light," I shouted back. "We need to channel our collective strength, our shared stories, to break through the darkness." The townsfolk rallied around me, linking arms as they steadied themselves against the tide of shadows. One by one, they began to share their own stories, tales of loss, pain, but also of resilience and hope. Each word became a beacon, illuminating the darkness, fueling our fight against the shadows that threatened to engulf us. As the first stories spilled out, I felt the energy in the air shift. The figures of our ancestors seemed to respond, their faces reflecting a mix of recognition and longing. I could almost hear their voices blending with ours, creating a symphony of shared history and emotion that filled the night. "Together," I urged, feeling the power of our unity surge. "We can overcome this." The shadows recoiled slightly, as if taken aback by our defiance. I took a deep breath, drawing strength from the mirror and the spirits it contained. We reclaim our narrative. We honor the truth of our past, and we will not be silenced. With each story shared, the light from the mirror grew brighter, casting long shadows that danced along the fairgrounds. The collective energy of our voices resonated, creating ripples that spread through the darkness, illuminating faces filled with fear and hope. Suddenly, a piercing wail echoed from the depths of the forest, chilling us to the bone. "They're coming," someone shouted, panic rising in the crowd. The shadows surged again, more aggressive, their forms twisting as if seeking to consume the light we had created. "Stay together," I called out, my heart pounding as I scanned the faces around me. "We cannot let them divide us." But as I spoke, I felt a familiar presence behind me. I turned to see Thomas, his face twisted in anguish, caught between his desire to flee and the pull of the truth we had all been avoiding. You think you can defeat them with words? They are part of us, he shouted, his voice raw with emotion. Yes, they are part of us, I replied, feeling the weight of his words. But that doesn't mean we have to be ruled by them. We can acknowledge our past and choose to move forward. Thomas hesitated, his gaze flickering between the shadows and the light we had forged. What if it's too late? He whispered, doubt creeping into his voice. What if the darkness has already taken too much? In that moment, I felt a surge of compassion for him. We are all fighting our own battles, I realized. It's never too late, Thomas. Together, we can reclaim our story, and in doing so, find redemption for ourselves and for those who came before us. Just as he seemed to waver, the shadows roared to life, a cacophony of whispers swirling around us, echoing our fears and regrets. The energy in the air shifted, becoming charged with malevolence. You are fools, a deep voice boomed, resonating from the heart of the darkness. You think you can escape your fate? I felt a chill creep down my spine, and the townsfolk around me began to tremble. But I knew we had to push through the fear. We face our fate together, I shouted, holding the mirror high. We will not be defined by our fears. As the mirror caught the light of the fairgrounds, its surface shimmered with visions of the past, images of our ancestors, of their struggles and triumphs. I could feel their energy merging with ours, a powerful reminder that we were never alone. Keep going, I urged the crowd. Let your stories be the light that guides us through. With renewed determination, the townsfolk shared their stories louder and with more passion. The mirror pulsed with energy, illuminating the shadows that writhed around us. Slowly, they began to retreat, their forms flickering as if uncertain of their footing in the face of our united front. But then, a powerful force surged from the forest, a dark figure emerging from the shadows, a woman cloaked in darkness, her features obscured. You dare challenge the past, she hissed, her voice a chilling whisper that echoed with the weight of centuries. Who are you? I demanded, stepping forward, the mirror still clutched tightly in my hand. The air crackled with tension as the figure advanced, her presence a palpable threat that sent shivers through the crowd. I am the keeper of the stories you wish to bury, she replied, her voice a mixture of pain and anger. I am the shadow of your history, the consequence of your ignorance. We are not ignorant. I shot back, my heart racing. We seek to understand, to confront what has haunted us for too long. Her laughter echoed through the air, a chilling sound that sent a wave of fear coursing through the crowd. You cannot simply wish away your past. It is a part of you, and you will pay the price for your transgressions. In that moment, I felt the weight of her words pressing down on me, a suffocating reminder of the fears that lingered just beneath the surface. But I refused to yield. We will pay whatever price is necessary to reclaim our narrative, I declared, my voice steady despite the rising dread within me. The shadows swirled around us, their energy a tumultuous storm. But just as I felt despair creeping in, I caught Sarah's gaze, her eyes filled with determination. Together, she mouthed, and I nodded, drawing strength from her presence. Together, I echoed, feeling the energy of our shared stories strengthen as we stood united against the encroaching darkness. With a fierce shout, I lifted the mirror higher, its light cutting through the swirling shadows. The dark figure faltered, momentarily distracted by the brightness that illuminated the fairgrounds. Now! I cried out, urging the townsfolk to focus their energy. Share your truths. Let them be your armor against the darkness. One by one, Their voices rose, powerful and unwavering, creating a chorus that resonated through the night. The light from the mirror intensified, illuminating the shadows and revealing the faces of those who had once been lost. The dark figure screamed, a sound filled with rage and despair. "You think this will save you? You will pay for your defiance." But as the shadows retreated, I felt a surge of hope. The collective energy of our voices wove together, creating a shield against the darkness, a protective barrier that allowed us to stand firm against the chaos. And then, in an explosive burst of light, the mirror shattered, its shards scattering into the night. But rather than despair, I felt a wave of liberation wash over me. The stories we had shared, the truth we had embraced, would not be forgotten. They would live on in our hearts, unbound by the shackles of fear. As the shadows recoiled, the dark figure dissolved into wisps of smoke, her anger replaced by an unsettling silence. The air grew still, and for a moment, we stood together, our breaths coming in unison, the reality of what we had just faced settling over us. And then, the townsfolk erupted into cheers, their voices rising in celebration of our victory over the darkness. I felt the warmth of hope enveloping us, a reminder that we had reclaimed our narrative, that our stories would guide us forward. But as I stood there, surrounded by the flickering lights of the fair and the joyous laughter of my community, I couldn't shake the feeling that the battle was not yet over. The darkness may have retreated, but it had left its mark. I glanced towards the forest, a shiver running down my spine as I recalled the chilling words of the dark figure. "You will pay for your transgressions." As the celebration continued, I knew deep down that the echoes of the past would always linger, a reminder of the journey we had undertaken. Together, we had faced the shadows, but the scars remained, deep, intricate lines etched into our souls, a testament to the battles fought and the truths uncovered. And as the night wore on, I couldn't help but wonder, was this truly the end, or merely a pause before the next chapter of our story began? Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.